8 years ago, a powerful force warped space and time. This led to the invasion of beings from another world. The monsters exterminated mankind as they pleased, soon resulting in a drastic decrease in population. Those who survived this apocalypse called it a magical wave, and the change in the magnetic field led to new professions that empowered people. People could awaken random starting talents and choose different professions within the system. And once chosen, the skills could be transferred to the real world. The awakened talent determined the fate of the professional, and from that time on, the sages moved on to a new way of living and fighting. In Zhang City, the first vocational academy appeared, which prepared the younger generation for later life. The principal folded his hands in a lock and informed the students that they had passed all the theoretical courses of the first professional academy, and today was the momentous day for the awakening of their talents. The man told the young men to come in and added that he was sure they were ready to become professionals after years of training. They have the power to protect humanity, even if they have to sacrifice themselves to do so. The old man said that the students named by number would undergo a talent awakening. Lin Ye, a student of the first professional academy, was thinking that after so many years in this world, the long-awaited day of talent awakening had finally arrived. The rarity of talents also varies and is divided into several types. The most widely encountered, of course, it is common, rare, and rare falls most often to a select few. Also highlighted is the legendary talent that not everyone and not always young people get. This also applies to the divine subspecies. It must be earned through long and hard work. As for the fantastic, it hasn't existed since the awakening of humanity. The most coveted professions were swordsmen and mages, followed by assassins, summoners, and warriors. But priests were the most disrespected of all the professions. In extremely difficult copies, as long as there is an experienced player, mages and summoners can replace the role of the priest. And the priests, forced to hide behind the team, only just getting experience and healing, have become a complete laughingstock. Lin Ye was tugged by a girl's sleeve and asked him if he had decided on a profession. The young man smiled and remarked that he had said there was no point in thinking about it now, and he would only realize what profession suited him as he tried out his talent. The girl sighed heavily and said that she was just asking him. Her name was Sumumu. She was also a student of the first professional academy. The guys who were standing a little behind and watching everything remarked that goddess Mumu was more gorgeous today than ever. Our hero heard these words and put his hand on the girl's head, and she squeezed her eyes shut. Lin squinted one eye and looked at the young men who were discussing the beauty. Those got very angry, frowned, and yelled for Knight to let her go as soon as possible. The guy along with the girl walked forward, and the guys behind them said that Lin was a complete lowlife. One of the men remarked that the young man was always making something out of himself, and added that he was very interested in what talent he would have. Sue, who heard all this, folded her arms across her chest and shouted for the guys to slow down. Just as suddenly, someone reported that the 1,001st Wang Shuai had awakened a very rare talent, a powerful talent, and it gave a 50% increase in strength skills. Someone in the audience shouted that rare talent, it was perfect for the power warrior profession, and added that the handsome boy would definitely be the best in this challenge. Our hero listened to these words very intensely. He was thinking about something for a long time, and then he remarked that he really wanted to know why that guy was so loved by the gods. Lin put his hand on Mumu's shoulder and told the girl to ignore the guys. The girl blushed and wondered why the young man never paid attention to other people's opinions. She took a few steps forward, then stopped and turned to Knight. Thoth was silent, frowned, and replied that it was the only way he could become the strongest. The young man remembered his father and mother running with him in their arms toward the open shelter. The father was calming the baby and telling him not to be afraid, for they were almost there, and the monster was breathing right on top of them. After a few seconds, the man fell to the ground, and the child started calling for him very loudly. The monster was already approaching his father, but he ordered the little boy to run faster inside. The mother, who was also put in its jaws by the monster, screamed for the child to survive. After a while, the kid heard someone talking about how there were survivors, and they needed to be brought in quickly. The child called out for his parents, but a woman came up to him and said she was now his family and invited him to go home with them. The guy told Mumu that this was the only way he could protect himself, as suddenly his number and name popped up on the scoreboard. He informed the girl that he had to go, as it was his turn, and she stood puzzled. And our hero entered the huge arena. It was illuminated with golden light from all sides. He seemed to float in the air, and after a few seconds he asked if this was the place where talents were awakened. Just a few seconds later, he saw a white and red dragon hovering near him. Lin shouted. He felt as if his whole body had been electrocuted. And then he read that he had gotten the fantastic talent of heaven and earth conversion. He was immediately suggested to hide it since it had never manifested before. The guy agreed to it. Conversion of heaven and earth. Level 1 overrides and enhances all skills on the wielder, with the ability to freely activate and deactivate. If upgraded to a higher level, it can change the nature of skills. Current enhancement effect, mana consumption reduced by 10%. The current transformation effect, buffs become debuffs, debuffs become buffs, and the upgrade requirement is to raise personal level to 10. To undo all the effects on himself and freely switch this fantastic talent, the guy realized and thought about the fact that it meant the Vrani could never overpower him. He thought about what if they used non-skill attacks, like basic strikes, or if he was healed by a priest, it could break invulnerability and harm him directly. That was why the guy said it was necessary to hide his talent and clenched his hand into a fist. He walked out of the arena and voiced that he was 1128 and his awakened talent was hidden. The young man told Mumu not to look at him like that, because his talent was still a secret. The people who were in the square started saying that Lin had a shameful talent, and that's why he hid it. Someone added that a lowly person deserved a lowly talent. Some said the guy was a loser, but there were also those who pointed out that one should proceed to choose a profession. Mumu was told she could proceed to choose a talent. Students who have already completed the awakening of talent choose a profession through the goddess statue. Our hero stepped closer, and it was announced that the next one could proceed to the selection. A system message appeared in front of him saying that the guy was entitled to get the profession he wanted. Knight thought about the fact that if one considered invincibility to a certain degree, then heaven and earth reversal was definitely a divine skill. He looked in front of him and thought, to make the most of the power of his talent, he must compensate for his weaknesses, and chose the right profession. A message appeared in front of Lin to confirm his profession once again. He was also asked if he was indeed choosing a priest. This was the first student of the session who decided to become a priest. The young man smiled and said that was right. He really wanted to be a priest. Everything around was illuminated with a yellow light, and there were reports that the change of occupation had been confirmed. A moment later, the young man read that the change of profession was complete and rejoiced greatly. A message appeared in front of our hero. He could read more about his status and characteristics. The young man scrutinized everything very carefully, for it was all new to him. He closed his eyes and thought about trying and activating the heaven and earth reversal skill. The system window with the description of the healing art appeared in front of the young man again. Knight smiled and thought about the fact that the skill was interpreted as reducing health rather than dealing damage. But it wouldn't resist protective armor, and that was equivalent to true damage. The guy thought it was great that he also had the art of clairvoyance, because a seemingly unnoticeable mana leak could interfere with mages, which would expose weaknesses. The young man reflected on the fact that he still needed to be careful with healing skills or allied buffs. And with the heaven and earth circulation talent, they could more quickly hurt than help. The people who stood near the steps spoke of how there were those who chose the profession of a priest and remarked that it was most likely some coward who wished to hide behind the backs of his team. It was voiced that Su Mumu had awakened a legendary talent, Bionic Tears, which consisted of being able to summon spirits from another world to fight for her. Everyone began to discuss the girl's legendary talent. They were also curious about the profession she had chosen. The girl approached the goddess statue and a system message appeared in front of her telling her to choose the profession she wished to pursue. Su didn't think for a long time. She was very serious, and immediately replied that she was choosing the profession of a magician. Lin closed his eyes and thought about the fact that a mage with a legendary talent was a great thing. After all, there was the potential to become a full-fledged member of a professional alliance. The headmaster of the academy remarked that he was interested in something else, for none of the students had chosen the profession of priest in a long time. The young men stared at him intently, and our hero, who had become a priest, remained silent. Someone around the headmaster remarked that Knight had not to say reluctantly chosen the priestly profession, but the man only stroked his beard. Mumu flew at the speed of light towards our hero and called his name very loudly. Then she more calmly announced that she had decided to become a mage, and offered to go to the competition together. The young man thanked for the invitation and noted that he had other plans. The girl opened her eyes wide, looked intently at the guy, and asked what he was planning. Just as suddenly there was a system message that the Les Wolves beginner competition was now open, and students who have completed the talent awakening and career change can get to it. The boy approached Knight and asked him if he could speak to Mumu for him. He wanted to offer her to join his team, and also remarked that he could take the young man with him if he followed orders. Someone in the crowd said that if it wasn't for Goddess Su, they wouldn't have fiddled with him. But Lin immediately refused and was called ungrateful. The academy director squinted and remarked that teamwork was needed in the competition, and added that even with enough talent, it was difficult to resist hordes of demons. The students turned their heads and stared at the older man. Someone in the crowd said hello to him, and the headmaster remarked that in the face of demons, Any disagreements must be set aside. Lin calmly replied that they had no disagreement, and added that he simply believed that going solo gave more experience and rewards. The man became very angry. He had no idea how a priest could act alone. He noted that in a pinch they could change teams, but health safety is not something to be trifled with, and everything that happens in the competition affects reality. Knight thanked the director and said he would still go alone, and thought to himself that in order to level up, the young man walked away and thought that his power would not become powerful enough until he revealed his divine talent to others, and the old man wondered why Lin was so confident. A system message appeared before the young man, and he began to study it with interest. It stated that the beginner's trial competition is dangerous, and it is recommended that it be done in a team. When asked if the guy wanted to go it alone, our hero answered in the affirmative. From the next message, he learned that the Forest of Wolves trial was not easy, and newcomers should take it in a team. The message indicated that there were bloodthirsty wolves in the forest, that he shouldn't let surround himself, or he wouldn't be able to get out. The guy thought about the fact that the Forest of Wolves, it is a difficult level for students new to the competition. In the cooperative can avoid losses and getting a B rating is already the best result. He remembered that there was a healing spring in the middle of the circle, where all professionals could regain their health. It kept the newcomers safe. The status of the priests lowered even more. Risk-takers don't eliminate wolves along the way. They lead them, Knight thought to himself as he saw his opponents approaching. The young man squinted his eyes and thought about the fact that some players went deeper into the forest, entering forbidden areas, and in that case, they would definitely die. But since he has a divine talent, how can he be satisfied with an ordinary rating? Our hero gathered his thoughts and realized for himself that he should definitely get to the legendary Forbidden Lands. In the depths of the wolf forest, its inhabitants gradually began to approach him, for they were its masters. The young man looked at his opponents and read their characteristics as there was a system message in front of him. Literally after a few seconds, the first wolf threw himself at him. He was the bravest, and the guy used the healing skill. The raptor had been dealt 50 points of reverse damage and was no longer a threat. A new wolf rushed towards Lin Ye, but the new wolf was very quick to deal with his attack, also gaining health points. The guy activated the reverse mode, the reverse clairvoyance technique, the imprisonment technique. A message appeared in front of the young man saying that he had spent 30 mana points. He read that his ability clears the opponent's mana, causing the target to be unable to move. He looked at the wolf and thought about how the imprisonment technique was quite effective. The young man stood and watched as another predator approached him. Therefore, our hero immediately applied the healing technique, because the wolf was already a few centimeters away from him. A system message appeared in front of Knight, saying that 50 points of reverse damage had been dealt to the enemy. The young man looked at the wolves that were calmly lying aside, and thought that one mob gives 10 experience points, and if he destroyed all the mobs on this circle, he would get at least level 4. His target was the last hidden boss, and even with a difference of 1 level, he was no problem. At this time, behind Lin's back was a wolf that was already ready to swoop down on him. Out of the corner of his eye, the guy saw the monster and immediately dealt reverse damage to it without harm. He wiped his face and thought about the fact that he had thoroughly prepared for this day. The young man was well aware that the enemy would not think about what level you were before killing you. A system message appeared in front of the young man that reverse mode had been disabled and decided to use the clairvoyance technique. From the next message, the player learned that he had been upgraded to level 2, and all stats had been increased. Lin got 2 free attributes and added all the intelligence points. The guy thought about his ability to heal without harm and constantly recover mana. The director of the academy talked about the fact that during schooling a certain area is forbidden to explore. He was surprised that the player wants to fight the boss. He thought about our hero not purposefully seeking death and concluded that his hidden talent was of legendary level or even higher. The gray-haired man said if the player wasn't going to unleash his talent just yet, he would need to look at other worthy candidates. He really hoped Knight would come back alive. The guard who was near the principal said he was betting on this guy breaking the record, and asked if the old man had said the girl was a worthy candidate. It was about Sumumu, who, unlike our hero, was on a team, and they were also attacked by a wolf. The girl immediately saw the opponent and began to use a skill such as Frost Flash. Her partners shouted that the goddess was very strong. Su attacked the monster. Ice blocks flew at it, and it screamed as if furious. Belle saw more predators approaching them and thought about the fact that it was not good to eat. She shouted that there were more mobs and needed to escape, but immediately thought about the fact that doing so would cause the goddess's image to immediately shatter. The girl made a lightning-fast decision and yelled for the guys to get behind her back. She didn't think long and immediately applied a skill like Bionic Tears. And after a few seconds, she decided to use a special skill like Frost Flash. The monsters after that no longer posed any danger to the players. The wolves flew off to the sides. Mumu frowned, pressed her lips together, and said with joy in her voice that they were safe now. The director, who was also watching her, remarked that it wasn't bad, and his staff member remarked that not having combat experience and relying on talent wouldn't get you far. And our hero got promoted to level 3, collected points. He thought about the speed as he expected, and killing steel mobs will promote him to level 4. As suddenly the young man heard some rustling, he stopped and turned his head. Lin went to the bush. It was the bush that caused the sounds and thought it was here. And he saw several wolves on the hillock. Chief among them was a dark descendant of the Wolf King. The guy learned from the system message that he is the ruler of the wolf forest and is very ferocious by nature. He attacks any creature he sees. Since it is a hidden boss, it is mentioned in textbooks as a forbidden mob. A large number of students have been injured trying to fight it. Future heroes have been bitten. That's why the Academy had taken these lands down on the list of forbidden places. And Knight thought wild wolves were always hanging around the king. He understood wolves, like any normal animals, would leave from time to find a comfortable place and not return to the den after all problems were solved. The young man knew that they often left, making it easy to eliminate them one by one. A system message appeared in front of the guy saying that he had done reverse damage to the wild wolf. He thought about the fact that the problematic mobs for him are the best blood bags, because once he picks up the experience, he will immediately go solo on the dark descendant of the Wolf King. While the king has fewer and fewer subordinates left, his level increases, and immediately in front of Lin, a system message appeared saying that he had reached the 4th level. As suddenly the dark descendant of the Wolf King started screaming like an eel. He was very angry. The young man smiled and wondered if he had finally seen what was missing. He looked at his opponent and informed them that they were starting the final game. He had previously familiarized himself with the characteristics of the Wolf King. The guy was well aware that the stats were much higher than normal wolves. But our hero wasn't going to lag behind. His opponent started growling at him, but that didn't stop Lin. He thought about the fact that the Wolf King's attacks were only replenishing his resources, and if he attacked him further, he would straighten him out just by standing still. The Wolf King shone his eyes, bared his teeth, and breathed very heavily from exertion. A message appeared in front of the young man TMO, that the recharge was complete, and he was very surprised that it was already over. The enemy's eyes lit up and roared very loudly. Then there was a message that the Wolf King was making a basic attack, a claw strike. But that didn't bother the guy at all. He was focused and ready to fight the wolf. He hit a few meters our hero, and he asked if the predator understood after all. And then reported that it was bad because it was done too late. The monster was furious. The young man fought the Wolf King and thought, if there was a pack of wolves around him right now, he would have to try harder. The young man stared intently in front of him, happy that the enemy was all alone. After a while, a message appeared in front of him saying that killing the Dark Wolf King gives 1,000 experience points and raises the level to 5th. The young man read that he had completed the Circle of the Forest of Wolves and was rewarded with a bronze chest. And then there was a message that no skill had been damaged. His rating had been upgraded to level 555. Our hero said if it wasn't for the fact that reverse healing isn't a damage-dealing skill, he might have gotten an SSS rating by now. All the students found out that someone had completed the Forest of Wolves challenge, completed all the hidden achievements, and got a high rating. This surprised them a lot. They began to talk about who it could be. There were some who noted that it was a historical event. The principal said that that student was unrivaled and unique, and then remarked that as far as he could remember, Lin Knight had dared to enter those lands. His assistant asked how such a thing was even possible, since the main condition for getting an SSS rating is to pass the level without taking damage, and how can there be a solo without taking damage? Mumu thought about how the guy was able to get such a high level, and the other players began to whisper amongst themselves. Some were worried about the young man, but he walked through the woods that posed no danger and said he was lucky, and then made the decision to open the chest he received as a reward. He did so, and a message appeared in front of him saying that he had obtained a silver-level skill book, silver equipment. But that wasn't all the rewards, because the guy received a shadow dagger. From the message he learned that it increases attack power, increases marksmanship. The guy also started learning the active skill Divine Healing, which blesses all allies within 12 meters with sacred power. The young man thought about the fact that the skill had a rather long cooldown and high mana cost. Well, at least in the early stages it wasn't a problem. He realized that a burst of AoE with such high damage was the strongest ultimatum strike in the early stage. Our hero had a huge number of thoughts in his head. He thought not only about the awards, but also about his aunt and uncle, as he did not want to sit on their necks. A system message appeared in front of Lin that he had 5 points to spare. He was well aware of the fact that it was very useful, and the source of the points was very rare. The guy stared intently in front of him and thought about the fact that just reaching SSS level gave him extra stat points. Our hero made the decision to channel their intelligence. He made the decision that from today, he would become the best mage and the most brutal priest of disasters. The students started shouting that the players were coming out, and it looked like it was an SSS-ranked team. The silhouette of a single person began to appear from the gate. The people present recognized Lin Ye and were very surprised. They began to talk about what others were not yet finished. Someone in the crowd remarked that they wanted to see the hidden awards. Sumumu started running to our hero with all her legs and asked him to lay out if it was him. The guys couldn't believe that this loser had done brilliantly. Someone noticed that the guy came empty-handed. The young men stood behind the guy's back and laughed happily. They couldn't believe he had succeeded. Knight raised his hand with his dagger up and asked if there was anyone here who had changed professions to assassin, and added that he offered weapons of excellent quality. Someone from the gathered players asked how he got it, since it was a silver-grade weapon. Lin simply asked if they wanted the dagger, and the guys started saying they wanted it. Our hero thought that the 50,000 that one of the players had offered for the dagger was a decent price for a premium weapon, and he said that he was ready to sell the dagger for 50,000. All present looked intently at the young man. As the girl shouted out that she was willing to buy the weapon for 100,000, the players present were very surprised. They opened their mouths, as they understood that the family's income per year was 10,000 coins, and to accumulate 100,000 coins would take a long time, and it was simply a prohibitive amount. The young man pressed his lips together and thought about the fact that 100,000 might be a bit much for such a first-class dagger, but it wasn't that expensive. The guy let go of the weapon that had begun to hover over his palm and said it was sold. The guys came up to Lin and asked him what level he was currently at. He calmly replied that he was level 5. Those didn't settle down and asked what team he was on, whether it was true that he had gotten an SSS rating, and the principal along with his assistant watched everything closely. A gray-haired old man remarked that this student was not on any team. One of the men interrupted him and remarked that no one had ever been able to do that, and he had to find a team after entering the dungeon. Someone in the audience wondered if it was possible that a student had single-handedly gotten an SSS rating in a beginner's dungeon. And the main requirement was to pass solo without damage. And now even all entry-level professionals cannot achieve this. One of the guy's friends began to ask if they should pester Lin Ye further. Thoth clenched his hand into a fist and remarked that the guy had just gotten lucky and was cheating anyway, and was most likely a low-level priest, and added that they would teach him a lesson next time. The director of the academy told the students that all the tests had been completed, and from today they were no longer ordinary students, but trainees with unusual abilities. Lin stood together with Su. They listened to the fact that in 30 days, they would pass the most important stage in their lives, the professional test. The elderly man noted that in the future, they would return either as ordinary people or become heroes who would fight against demons. The gray-haired old man said that it would all depend on how they performed after 30 days, and within a month, they should visit the initial dungeons and reach at least level 10. Our hero thought that the professional test should be taken by a team, because team coordination is one of the important evaluation criteria. The young man looked at Muma and thought about the fact that he had already identified his partner. He knew not to look at her perpetually cold image. In fact, she needed caring more than anyone. Simple-minded, clumsy, but trusting and extremely loyal. Su is not always able to hide her true nature, but though she has awakened powerful talents, Knight has come to the conclusion that he must protect her. He remembered his aunt and uncle again, and of course remembered their arrangements, and would never let that tragedy happen again. So he suggested the girl skip dinner tonight and go to a more dangerous dungeon. The young men went to a dungeon called the Stone Cave, which was home to a huge number of poisonous scorpions. A message appeared in front of the young people where they could select a difficulty level. Our hero did not think for a long time, but immediately chose a difficult level and pressed the button. The higher the level, the higher the monster stats, more participants and more valuable rewards are needed, and Stone Cave only has medium and difficult levels. The dungeon Stone Cave does not have an initial dungeon, but only medium and difficult levels. Mumu asked the young man why he had chosen a difficult level. She realized that although it was the initial dungeon, it still wouldn't be easy, but Lin just told the girl to trust him. Su replied that she didn't say she didn't trust him. She just thought it would be difficult for her to get out of the dungeon without damage, and she might just be thwarting him. The young man raised his finger up and said about this dungeon having a pass method. The girl was very surprised and asked if he meant avoiding monsters for dungeon sweeps. Lin noticed that the monsters in this dungeon had changed and added that he had found the data left behind by the main ones, integrated it, reconstructed it, and by his calculations, a pass was possible. Sue opened her eyes wide and thought that this was amazing. It was like reconstructing the scene solely through deduction. She thought about how she had always known Knight was hiding his true power. He had started studying dungeon types and monsters early on, calculating different data, but all theoretical exams he passed with difficulty, and he was always considered a complete fool by everyone. Our hero looked at the girl and asked what she was thinking about, and beckoned her to come along with him. She opened her eyes wide, her cheeks still covered with blush, and replied that she was coming. Mumu Senda believed that the guy would become a hero and save the world. In just a few seconds, the young men found themselves inside the stone cave dungeon and began to look around. Sue said with a smile on her face about how beautiful it was here. But the guy noticed that this was a wild dungeon, and it was much more dangerous than the previous ones. A system message popped up in front of the Lin that they would be having a trial with other teams, due to not having enough players on their team. He told the girl that this dungeon could really force out of passing with others. And then Knight remarked that here they would not only have to face monsters, but also competitors, so they should be careful. As suddenly the young men froze, they were very much frightened. For a few meters from them there was a strong explosion. The guy, from the rival team, was thrown back a few meters. The players looked at everything happening with fear. He frowned, squeezed his eyes shut, and began to wipe the drops of blood that appeared on his face. He looked at the monsters and thought about how he didn't realize the smaller mobs would be able to knock them off. The level of danger is much more imaginative. And the guy had a drop of sweat on his face. He turned his head and saw our hero. Without thinking for long, the kid shouted for Lin to help them, and wondered if he had forgotten about the Academy's mutual aid agreement. The young man stopped, frowned, and then answered his opponent to help himself. The kid didn't think for long and started yelling at Knight that he was a pathetic priest. But the young man grabbed Mumu's hand and said they had to get out of here. He turned his head and informed the girl. Then scorpions are very much afraid of water, and they have a small attack range. And he added that she should follow him and do whatever he said, then she would definitely not be poisoned. And Sue replied that she understood. The young man was quiet for a moment and added that also scorpions are very sensitive to sound, and immediately began to use the roundup technique against opponents. He didn't think for long. He was approached by Mumu asking if it was his talent and said it was SSS rated. But the guy immediately asked the girl to be quiet. And the main condition for the pass was to take a unique route and avoid the attention of monsters. You had to find a bug in this dungeon. Lin said that there is a body of water on the map where creatures afraid of water gather, and there is spring water there. It is completely harmless to humans and you can drink it. The guy did not think for a long time, but immediately shouted that he should jump, which he did very promptly. And the girl was puzzled. Mumu stood for a moment, looked at the water, and after a few seconds, jumped to follow. The girl was fine, and came out to a young man who was holding a rock in his hands and thinking about something. And the guys who had a fight a while back were being approached by scorpions a few minutes ago. Those could not understand what was going on, and stood in bewilderment, watching what was happening. The monsters began to approach the body of water in an entire army, and then stopped at the water's edge. And there on the island were Lin Knight and Su Mumu, who felt safe. The venomous Scorpion King was very huge and deadly poisonous, especially its sting. Our hero frowned and began to beckon the monster to him, for he remembered well that he was afraid of water. But the monster stood near the pond and only made frightening sounds, but did not approach the water. Lin smiled, looked at the scorpion intently and said if he didn't step up, he would do so. And just a few seconds later, he began to kill one by one poisonous scorpions. He did it until he got 2,000 experience points. Lin's rival couldn't believe that the priest had such powerful spell damage. After all, he and his team could barely defeat a single scorpion. The boys looked in front of them and couldn't believe what they saw. Sue said she would deal with the rest of the monsters and use the biomimicry tear skill and the ice spell. She was very surprised that she was able to raise her level so quickly. She now had a level 4, this Mumu had learned from the system message. Knight turned his head to the girl and said that now they must fight the poisonous Scorpion King. He told his partner about their opponent being able to confront his innate fear of water. Mumu applied her ice spell skill and read from the system message that it does 10 spell damage, and she was very much surprised. She was surprised that the monster had such a defense. She was afraid of making a mistake, but the guy reassured her and noticed that the core was in the second segment of the abdomen. But the young man didn't finish. As the Scorpion King began to attack them, he shouted for Sue to continue creating fulcrums. The raid technique dealt 150 damage to the poisonous Scorpion King, and our hero noted that the monster was very tough. The monster, despite taking damage, was approaching the youngsters, and the guy said it was about time, and he immediately applied the ice spell skill. Our hero fended off attacks, and think that his opponent only raises his body at a certain movement and shows a weak spot on his belly. He gathered himself and delivered a crit strike to the weak point. Thanks to this, 1,000 damage was dealt to the Poison Scorpion King. Mumu opened her mouth in surprise and shouted that it was awesome, and immediately a system message appeared saying that the dungeon walkthrough had been completed and rewards were starting to be given out. The young man's level was raised to level 6, and a golden treasure chest and 5 free stat points were also obtained. A guy along with a girl were reading a system message, and players from the other team were running towards them. The boys fell to their knees and begged him to take them under his wing, not to be angry. They were ready to serve him. But the young man didn't even turn to them, and told them to just keep their mouths shut and not tell anyone about today's event. The guy looked at the players with hatred and added, not to even think of blabbing, and then added that otherwise they would face very serious consequences. The young men were in the teleportation space and decided to open the chest here. They were well aware of the fact that no one there but them would be able to use it. Yiling ordered the treasure chest to open. The girl opened her mouth in surprise, since they had obtained 5 attribute points. She couldn't believe it. In addition, a 2-handed hunting sword, an ice shoe, a poison bubble, and an emerald ring fell out. Mumu was very much surprised, and Knight said that it was incredible luck. What attracted him the most was the ring. Although it was silver grade, it reduced the time it took to recharge skills. The young man was well aware of the fact that it was worth almost as much at auction as the free points they had gotten, and they could get about 1,000,000 coins for it. The guy told Sue that the poison bubble book was for mages and let the girl take it. The girl replied that the book was a gold-class poison-based book, but she had previously used ice-based skills, and added that once mages choose a skill attribute, they can only learn skills related to that attribute. Suddenly she became silent. A system message appeared in front of the girl, and she read that the hidden skill Master of the 5 Elements had been activated. 2 elements of the 5 elements had been opened, and Sue was very surprised. Lin, on the other hand, remarked that Mumu should dig deeper into all of this, and she might be able to unlock some other new perks, and added that he was thinking about it being an advantage of mages that set this class apart from all others and a trump card up their sleeve. The girl laughed and remarked that they should get going since time was up. She asked Lin how he was going to use those 5 attribute points and added that she'd like to see it, but the guy remarked that she wouldn't like his methods. The players were talking amongst themselves, some saying they were afraid of scorpions. Others pointed out that Mumu is such a beauty, a cutie. The guys apparently had a soft spot for her. There was also a category of guys who were curious about who was next to the girl, and noticed that he looked weak, but had recently reached SSS level. The Shadow Dagger was also discussed. Suddenly, a yellow sports car came at a strong speed. People were very much frightened. The guy who got out of the car remarked that Lao Zhao is right, as the girl he is talking about is indeed incredible. Sue grabbed Knight's arm and told him to get out of here, and he asked what was wrong. Mumu said she doesn't like people like that kid. He relies on his rich family and robbing innocent people, and also his hobby of picking on girls from poor families. But the brunette turned to her if she could wait literally 1 second. It was Huang Xiaofen, the heir of Huang Company. He gave his name and asked if the beauty would mind meeting him. The students began to whisper behind the guy's back. Everyone was interested in his life. No matter where he went, he immediately became the center of discussion. And the girl closed her eyes and said that she had a boyfriend. Our hero was very much surprised by this answer. Huang looked at Lin and thought that he was wearing cheap clothes from the market, and the girl was like a flower among cow dung. And the young man remarked that he thought then Sue knew Xiaofeng. Huan, on the other hand, put his hand up and yelled for the young man to get the hell out of here soon, and Knight punched him in the arm. The rich man shouted how the guy dared to hit him and asked if the person he messed with and used the warrior skill knew the charge, and then applied the reverse looting technique. But our hero stood and looked haughtily at his opponent. Just a few seconds later, the attacker was pushed aside as if by some unknown force. He fell to his knees, grabbed his stomach with one hand, and started screaming and moaning that he was in a lot of pain. After a few seconds, Juan looked up, drops of sweat appearing on his face, and he asked his opponent through gritted teeth what his class was. Lin, on the other hand, looked intently at the guy and replied that he hadn't done anything, and everyone around him could attest to that. Then our hero smiled broadly and announced that he was just a reaper and nothing more. Those present began to talk about what had happened and why Juan was lying on the ground, and Mumu realized it was Knight's talent. Xiaofeng began to rise to his feet. He clenched his teeth, folded his hand into a fist, and began to swear. Drops of sweat appeared on his face. He frowned and wanted to strike the young man. A second later, he was on the ground again, telling Lin to stop playing dirty while he thought about how the reverse technique worked in a very interesting way, not only dealing damage, but also additional damage. He looked at Juan and concluded that it came out a little weak, even though he hadn't used half of his power. Xiaofeng shouted, If the guy is so brave, then let him fight normally and he would make him kneel down and apologize. But some man from the crowd started shouting that you can't use your awakened powers in normal fights. The young man with glasses thought about the fact that Juan both had thick skin and top-notch equipment, who was his opponent. He knew that Knight had gone through the dungeon alone, and his level had increased to level 5. He immediately apologized to the young man for his friend's ugly behavior, while he himself thought about why he hadn't heard anything about Lina before. Knight replied that he didn't want to stir up conflict, but Xiaofeng disagreed. He actually yelled for Zhao Qihan to teach our hero a lesson, but the man with glasses was smarter and wasn't going to attack Knight. This made Juan very angry. He looked very ugly, his face twisted with anger, and you couldn't tell he was the scion of a wealthy family. Zhao began to lead his friend away and told Lin that if Huang didn't calm down today, he was unlikely to calm down in the future, so he should be careful. He also asked the guy not to come to school this month and held out his hand with a bank card as compensation, offered to help with any problems. He was really hoping for understanding, but Knight refused everything. The young man remarked that he wouldn't bother anyone if no one was bothering him, and remarked that he wondered what Juan would try to do to him, and he himself was leaving with Mumu, and thinking about the fact that he had a wonderful ability to see what he could do. Lin posted a strategy online with which to complete levels in a stone cave. Sue asked him if he would be able to sell it for the price he wanted, as she was very worried. The guy was sure that no one would refuse the free attribute points, and at this time, the players of one of the teams were in the cave. Their condition was not easy. They wanted to buy a strategy and check everything. Some people had doubts and were afraid to spend money on anything, but they took the risk. And after literally 3 minutes, the dungeon was cleared, and SSS level was reached. It was quite amazing for the player. One of the guys who purchased the strategy was glad he passed the level. It was amazing to him that the strategy was so simple, but it was so undiscovered. The second kid also pointed out that the terrain of the stone cave is too complicated and the conditions are strange, but with the strategy, everything is simple and clear. Also, young people commented that the strategy fees are more than adequate. Players have been actively searching the net for a strategy with which to still get free characterization points. Mumu was very happy that more and more people were placing orders with them. In front of the woman was a website page where Knight was selling her strategy. She asked if her assistants had found the person who was selling it all. Those responded that the seller had used hacking techniques, and then added that the IP address was in a professional academy. The girl turned her head and noticed that there was something entertaining going on at the academy this year. And Ling Yu wrote in a private message that they wanted to buy a big sword, and they agreed to meet at the entrance to the school dungeon. Mumu rejoiced that the guy managed to earn more than 300,000. The young man noted that everything was as planned and added that he was being actively advertised. The young man thought about it and noted that they would still need to go through more dungeons, and the graduation weapon would have to be replaced eventually, and then added that with top-end gear with no understanding of combat, they're just cannon fodder. Sue remarked that the time before the challenge is very precious, and added that he always wanted to get stronger, and then asked why he was spending it strategizing and working to get money. The young man smiled and said that he would need that money to protect the people he cared about, because after all, they were protecting him. Guy noted that in his past life he had no family and could never feel warmth and support, and to be brought into this world was his greatest good fortune. And he added that he now has parents who love him dearly, but 10 years ago, relatives treated him like a leper. Those native people dreamed of the child dying in magical waves just like his parents. They wanted to divide the inheritance between them. The so-called relatives in front of the child talked about how the inheritance would be divided and lamented that the boy should have been put in an orphanage. The adults frothing at the mouth began to estimate who gave and how much and bought the baby. It was all said to snatch a larger percentage of the inheritance. It was then that Knight ran away. He thought about getting enough food and surviving. But then his uncle and aunt took him into their home and treated him like their own son. These kind people treated the child well, and the child gradually relaxed. And later they helped him recover his parents' inheritance and cared for the boy wholeheartedly. The young man looked at the boys running out of the school and noticed that without his aunt and uncle he would not be able to continue his studies. And he added that he was now earning money to repay the good relatives for his debt. The guy was well aware that getting stronger was also about using all his power to protect the important people of his life, and not repeat past mistakes. The young man heard someone say hello to him and turned his head, bewilderment in his eyes. The girl asked if he was selling the hunting sword. It was Bai Ji, a student of the first professional academy. She introduced herself to the guy. And the one asked with surprise if she was a student or maybe a jock and added that she doesn't do face-to-face conversations. But the one replied that she was, and her phone went dead just a few minutes ago. Our hero asked to confirm the purchase, and noticed that the hunting sword attribute was non-refundable. The young man frowned, he became ok, and began to hand the girl the inventory. She glared at him and caught the hunting sword quite deftly. Bai then asked if it really only cost 80,000 and added that it cost 200 on the hunt. The guy asked if the teachers at school told him about market prices. The girl replied that she has always had trouble with math, so she has no idea what costs how much. Lin thought she was a rich fool and advised her to check the cost next time so she wouldn't be cheated, and Ji thanked him and paid for the weapon. From the system message, the young man learned that he had received 80,000 and his balance had exceeded 1 million, and he had received the status of a gold card user. The guy was glad he didn't have to spend money on shipping and said that if the girl needed anything, he was always at her service. A system message appeared in front of him that an unknown power had been assigned to him. He had received a special buff called the Goddess Luck Gaze. Our hero was very much surprised, and then asked the girl if it was her talent. Ta answered in the affirmative, and then added that she could still improve it, and asked if she could join his team. Knight looked at her and thought about how a talent like Ji's was very rare. The guy realized that the girl's talent was not only limited by the quality of the bounty boxes, because even those with weak talents could open legendary and divine boxes with such a buff. The young man opened his mouth in surprise, and wondered if Bai had told anyone else about her skill. Ta replied that she hadn't told anyone about it, and Lin asked if the skill had limitations. Bai informed her that she could only use it 3 times a week and only on one person. Knight asked her not to tell anyone about the skill, and added that her buff is incredible, and the potential of it is terrifying. But once people know about it, they will reach for her. The young man noted that they could also take away the girl's freedom to monopolize her abilities. Ji asked about the Alliance of Professionals, where they would eventually come to, and this organization leads humanity to fight the magic wave. But after all, within the Alliance there are many factions with complex relationships, overt and covert fighting. Assassinations and betrayals happen all the time. That was why Lin offered Ji to join his team and remarked that they would take care of her. The latter was very surprised, and asked if he was telling the truth. The young man smiled, introduced himself again, extended his hand and told the girl he was glad to have her on his team, and offered to go meet her comrades. Bai got excited and remarked that no one believed she could fight on the front lines, and the guy thought about how she handled a big sword. After a while, the young men approached Su and she immediately asked if he was the jock and clarified, now he was their comrade. The girl stammered and introduced herself. Mumu held out her hand and said her name, and Zhu noticed that the one was very pretty, and her hand was so soft. Our hero thought about why that one was staring at him like that, and Su hugged Bai and asked how Knight was acting towards her. The guy coughed and suggested we go to lunch and then discuss the dungeon. Mumu turned her head and clarified what they would be discussing. Ji opened her mouth and eyes wide with surprise, and somewhere out there it was still very quiet in the goblin's dungeon until our hero visited there. Lin had determined that the nightmare level suited him, but in order for everyone to get free characterization points, the guy decided to go alone, and then he would make a guide for the girls. The nightmare level is the highest difficulty of the field dungeons during the beginner's period, but the rewards here are also the most generous, and the treasure chest will be gold ranked. But similarly, the characteristics of the monsters are enhanced, and if the professional is not careful, he may lose his life. So a difficulty such as money is more important than life is highly not recommended. Su shouted that it was impossible. She asked Knight if he was going to kill himself, and remarked that it was not reckless to challenge the nightmare level right now. The same replied that it was fine. He wondered if she doubted his abilities. Mumu replied that she trusted the guy, but the nightmare level of the goblin dungeon was too dangerous. Ji couldn't bear to watch the young men fight, remarked that she had business to attend to, informed her that she would go first, said goodbye and ran off. Lin told Su that he knew she was worried and asked her not to worry, and said he would challenge the normal dungeon level and offered to go home to eat. The girl asked the young man to promise that he would do so, otherwise she would tell her parents everything. The boy thought that he should obey the girl for the time being, and in the evening, he would pass the dungeon alone. Mumu wondered if Lin was really so strong that he could do this too. The media posted pictures of our hero and information that he is the strongest rookie of all time. The author of the article pointed out that he took the photo at the teleportation point in the dungeon, and the guy is going through the dungeons alone, and a whole scandal broke out in the comments. The comments were quite varied, with some wondering who this guy was, but there were those who did not believe the author. In general, people wrote very actively under the post. Su was holding her phone in her hands, and Knight asked the girl what she was looking at and called her over to eat. And the young man snatched her cell phone from the girl's hands, and so very loudly screamed. The woman said about the children's good effort in the past few days and invited them to eat. Su and Lin thanked her. Uncle asked Knight how he was feeling and how the ordeal had gone. The lad remarked that he was fine. The man laughed and remarked that the young man had been so stubborn since childhood. They would find out once he made up his mind. Not even a dozen horses could stop him. The boy asked if anyone had complained about him, and he immediately pointed to Muma, and she asked her daddy why he was being so blunt. Auntie started pouring food into his plate and said they wouldn't interfere with what he wanted to do, and added that they sometimes wished Knight was like Sue. And then she noticed that a stable and healthy life was enough for them and smiled. The young man smiled and said he would learn from his classmate Mumu and become a calm saltwater fish. The girl had drops of sweat on her face and was thinking about how she felt about being ridiculed. And the guy noticed he was joking and asked her uncle and aunt not to worry, and adding that he would not do what he was not capable of doing. Uncle informed Lin to always remember that this house would always be his support, and handed the guy a bank card. Knight informed him that he had already made some money and asked to keep the card. The aunt, however, said that the young man was going on trials and would need to spend more, and then added that if the young man didn't take the card, she would be angry, and he agreed. Our hero put the card in his inside pocket and thought about whether his parents could all see it and mentally let them know he was doing fine. The young man thought about how he would treasure the life he had now, for even it had come to him with difficulty. The young man stood in front of the monsters and said that he had to become stronger for their sake, and added that the dungeon-level nightmares would greet him. People's voices could be heard coming from Huang Xiaofeng's house, speaking in raised tones. Zhang Jihan talked about trying to save his brother and even reimbursed him for some of the money. Without him, he would have been in the hospital. But the man yelled that it was all lies, and remarked that he didn't need any help, and his Zhang was just a piece of scum. He wished he was wearing equipment, but his brother interrupted him and informed him that he needed to rest. Xiaofeng couldn't listen to these words. He picked up the glass that was on the bedside table. He threw it at Jihan and shouted that he had disgraced himself because of him, a coward. Huang yelled for the young man to get out. The man looked at his angry brother and asked him if he thought he would do whatever he wanted just because he was the youngest son of the Huan group, and remarked that he shouldn't agree to his uncle's request to take care of him. And then he added that Xiaofeng should be beaten so badly that his own mother wouldn't recognize him. And then he laughed and pointed out that he didn't even have a mother. The angry guy yelled that they were done talking, and if Zhaon left so he wouldn't come back, and started beating up the young man. The man with the glasses thinking about how Huan had no idea who he was messing with. A newcomer appearing out of nowhere who can seriously injure him without even using any active skills. And although he himself never admitted it, but he goes through dungeons alone, Jihan thought about it. Xiaofeng did not think of calming down. He took out his cell phone and asked the man to help him deal with someone. Invite the brothers with equipment and weapons. The boy frowned and through his teeth remarked that everything would be taken care of. But that ignorant boy needs to be taught a lesson. He needs to understand who makes the decisions at the academy. And our hero was already near the goblin dungeon. The first stage, the mystical forest, was waiting for him. There was a system message in front of the guy that listed the difficulty and description of the dungeon. But the most important thing was that no rewards would drop unless the last level was completed. There were monsters walking around somewhere, and Lin thought about how this dungeon was one of the most difficult dungeons. Because of the long mop-up time, unclear requirements, players don't come here to farm equipment and points. What attracted the young man was the fact that gold-level chests could be opened here, and with the blessing of the luck buff, even platinum-level chests could be opened. Goblins appeared in front of the guy, as well as a system message describing these monsters. Our hero smiled and thought about the timer being started. He was completely calm. He was well aware of the fact that in 5 minutes, the monsters would be gathering at the entrance. This time, his main goal was to test his optimized monster gathering and quick kill method. Knight realized that he not only needed to kill all the goblins and their king, but also the mopping up time for each level should not exceed 10 minutes. The young man knew that killing the boss should be done on the 5th level of the dungeon, and you need to withstand the attacks of monsters. In 30 seconds, monsters were to appear, and when this happened, our hero promptly began to destroy them. 2 minutes and 5 seconds had passed since the first level started, and the guy had met the goblin leaders. The guy was smiling, running away from monsters and shouting that everything approximately what he had previously evaluated. Our hero turned around and saw a huge number of monsters. They were all armed. The young man used his power, and because of this, divine healing was improved to level 2. He destroyed all the goblins on the first floor of the dungeon. A system message appeared in front of Lin that his strength, agility, spirit, and intelligence had increased. He looked at him and thought about the fact that he had managed to pass the first level in just 5 minutes, and his method of pulling monsters for the first level was not a problem. The kid was happy that even if the damage wasn't enough, there was still 5 minutes to deal it. Literally, after a while, all the monsters on the second level were destroyed. Thus, our hero quickly and fruitfully passed all levels and got to the 5th. He used a skill like teleportation, and in just a few seconds, he found himself in the Goblin Palace. The Monster King started screaming like a furious man when he saw the man. He asked how the man dared to encroach on his territory. A system message describing the monster's ability, strength, and level appeared in front of the guy. And he felt strange that the boss of the secret realm was right here. What was surprising was that there were no mobs nearby. And the monster started yelling at the young man to die. Lin had learned from the system message that the Goblin Dungeon Lord possessed immense strength, and he had no idea why he was using this attack. Just a few seconds later, the monster jumped up very high. This way it wanted to attack the young man. Thoth thought about immediately dodging to the side to avoid the point of impact, and lying on the ground to lessen the damage from the second wave of airstrikes. But the young man made a different decision. He cancelled the damage from the earthquake impact and the air shockwave from afar of the earthquake. The beast clenched its teeth. It was not prepared for this development, its eyes burning with hatred. At the same time, our hero's life points increased significantly, which could not help but please. The goblin's life points gradually decreased. He was yelling very loudly and wheezing with hopelessness. The guy read from the system message that the Goblin King was using the Dragon Spear ability, cancelling the effect of the ability, allowing him to recover 200 health points. Lin smiled and learned from the next message that the monster was using the Flight Summon ability, cancelling the effect of the ability, allowing the party to recover 40 health points and avoid being thrown back. The monster was very angry, and then asked the young man if his abilities were useless against him. The young man looked at the monster in surprise, for it wanted to say something. The Goblin King became enraged and yelled that he had found our hero's weakness, and began to call for his people to come here and kill the enemy. Knight thought that was to be expected from a nightmare-level sneak boss. He was certainly hard to deal with. The boy clenched the weapon he had in his hand harder, and thought about the fact that now was not the time to use the most powerful spell. The young man covered his mouth with his hand and frowned. His pupils became like dots. He looked in front of him with surprise. The Goblin King shouted to his underlings to attack the man, but not to use any abilities, and added to die faster. A huge number of monsters began to approach Lin, and their boss remarked that if the abilities didn't work on him, would he be able to withstand hundreds of normal attacks? And the monsters started advancing on the young man, and he used a skill such as dodging. The monsters realized that the man was going to run away from them and started firing their bows. Some arrows still hit our hero, and his health points are minus. Lin turned his head to the side, saw the arrows sticking out, and thought about what to make of their arrows. The young man applied his special skills and regained health points. Then the guy ran his hand over the wounds that came from the impact of the arrows, and those healed. The Goblin King's eyes glowed with hatred, and he shouted that the young man was unkillable, calling him a bloody human. But our hero calmly looked at the enemy. You could see from his face that the guy hated the monster. The monsters didn't like Lin's gaze, but he began to attack them, their health decreasing. The Goblin King shouted that the young man didn't have any warrior spirit. Then he shouted for the young man to stop running and fight him in a fair fight. Knight wondered if that was what he called warrior spirit, and thought to himself that it was time to clash. The monster shouted that perhaps there was demonic power in front of them, for how could it come from an insignificant race like him? Our hero was completely calm and remarked that this time should be the end of it. The castle the monsters were in was like being struck by lightning, and it began to burn. The monsters didn't stand a chance, and just a few seconds later, a message appeared saying that the Goblin Legion had been destroyed, and the player received 1,000 experience points. From the next message, Knight learned that the Goblin King's health scale was below 1%, and he was in a near-death state, and the monster was whispering that he was finished. The young man didn't look at his opponent for a long time, but immediately used a healing spell, a raid technique. The monster's entire body was still electrocuted. It was screaming and squirming in pain. Literally seconds later, system messages appeared saying that the Goblin King had been defeated, and the guy had gotten 5,000 experience points and leveled up to level 7, and that he would be getting a platinum chest. The young man looked in front of him and thought to himself that there was no mistaking that the ability of the lucky goddess's gaze was so powerful that it could directly improve the chest. The guy thought about the fact that this would be enough for a long time. He had 20 hours left for one more run and began to open the treasure chest. A message appeared in front of Lin that he had received a skill book, free characterization points, and equipment. The Holy Light skill book had a certain effect. You had to spend mana to attack the enemy with Holy Light. The young man also received a flame flask, a gold-level item that can deal 300 damage when fought, and the shimmering stone increases the characteristic value by 20 points. A skill book Divine Starburst also flew out of the chest. It restored health and could illuminate all team members. The sandstorm bow helped to summon a sandstorm when fired. which dealt additional damage with earth magic. Knight smiled and thought about the fact that he had gotten 1 gear and 2 platinum-level skill books. He was insanely happy. The young man was greatly encouraged that no matter how resilient the monster was, it could be killed quickly. The system message reappeared in front of the guy, and he confirmed that he wanted to learn the skills. Lin gained 15 characterization points to intelligence and studied the skill Divine Starburst and Holy Light. All characteristics were increased by 20 points. Our hero from the system message was able to examine his upgraded stats and thought to himself that he didn't go to this dungeon for nothing. The young man was pleased that his strength, agility, lucha, physique, and intelligence had all increased by 20 points. Just as suddenly he heard some noise. He turned his head and thought he was found. Knight asked Mumu if she was going to be in this dungeon too, and she angrily told him to stop fooling around. And the girl asked if the young man had cleared the nightmare-level goblin dungeon. He said it was true. Sue remarked that she knew that, and then added that she wanted to go to that dungeon herself. The guy wanted to say something else as a car stopped not far from them. A male voice reported that they had finally found them, and after all, how many teleportation points had been traveled? The stranger looked at the young men through a spyglass and noticed that Lin had a look on his forehead that said he wanted to get pummeled. Huang Xiaofeng was in the car with some kid. He said that Knight would be in trouble. And then he began to beat his partner on the head with all his might, and asked to whom he was saying all this. And the latter remarked that our hero was a very intimidating man, and he couldn't. Huan yelled for him to shut his mouth, and pointed out that he knew he would be of zero use to him. Just a few seconds later, his expression changed. A smile appeared on his face, and the kid declared that he was prepared. Our hero sat in front of the computer monitor, and stared intently into it. On the web, he posted a strategy with the help of which you could easily pass the nightmarish dungeon. The young man was very serious. He pressed his lips together and read the messages carefully. Then he found an article that posted pictures of him, and information that he was selling strategies and went through the SSS level himself. Users left a huge number of messages under the photos, few believing what they saw in front of them. In front of the young man began to appear one after another system messages that he had received coins, including for buying the strategy. And after a few more minutes, he familiarized himself with the fact that he had received 500 coins, and now his balance was 1.5 million coins. Lin looked carefully at the monitor and thought about how this was much more than he had expected. As the system message reappeared in front of him, he learned that the koi effect was still in effect for 15 hours. The young man thought about the fact that he still had time to rest and recuperate, and made the decision to go for a run. Our hero was walking quietly near the coast, and there were also people strolling around. As a sports car stopped a few meters away from him, the guy stopped to see what it was all about. In the car, he saw Huang Xiaofeng. The latter offered to take Lin to the right place, and the latter asked if the kid had not told Zhao Qizang that it was better not to mess with him. The guy told Knight not to mention his brother's name, because TT's a traitor, and the stranger who was in the car laughed and told our hero to listen to Xiaofeng for he would punch him in the face. Then the kid added that otherwise they might pay a visit to his family. The young man thought they had already found his home address. He started to walk to the car and noticed that Juan would act like a man and not cry and ask for help if he failed. He got very angry. He shouted to his partner that he forbade helping him and would challenge Lin himself to a fight, and added that he had excellent equipment, the likes of which the young man had never dreamed of. Our hero frowned, watching the boys closely, and thought about going for a run. Juan, however, quietly told his partner that they would go ahead with the plan. The latter agreed. Lin had already gotten in the car and told the guys to move quickly, and added that he didn't care how many, and added that he had things to do and didn't want to waste his time on them. Xiaofeng got very angry when he heard this, and shouted that the young man would still regret it. The one sat quietly in the auto, and Juan threatened to make Knight crawl on the ground like a dog. Knight glared at his opponent, squinted his eyes, and thought about making his life worse than death. And the car at breakneck speed went forward, for our hero into the unknown. After a while, he stopped near the forest. There was a great number of boys there, who immediately began to call out to Mr. Juan. Lin got out of the car and quietly noted that there were many of them here, and then asked if they would be one-on-one or a group. Xiaofeng quietly replied that there would be a duel, then turned his head to our hero, and replied with a snide smile on his face that Knight would fight their gang, and the kid's wind shadow blade appeared in his hand. The young man laughed and calmly replied to his opponent that he didn't care. Huang frowned. He continued to smile and noticed that Lin was about to die. He immediately pointed his hand at the guy and shouted to the boys to attack him. They did not hesitate to rush into battle. In the hands of our hero appeared weapons, and he calmly began to confront opponents, although there were a lot of them. The young man was attacked by a huge number of boys, but he easily dodged. The blonde man who was sitting with Juan in the auto used an assault weapon against Knight. The guy bounced to the side, and thought about how much power his opponents had. And then thought about the fact that he would have to use the inversion talent. The opponent began to laugh backwardly and told Lin that he was still a child, that's all. But in just a second, his expression changed very much, his entire body shaking with fear and terror. Not only him, but the other attackers became very sick, shaking, covered in drops of sweat and vomiting blood. The blonde wiped drops of sweat from his face and wondered what kind of trick Knight had used. He was well aware that they hadn't been attacked and wondered what this ability was. It instantly overcame the gold-level defense. The boys began to ask each other if they were all right. Someone remarked that Lin was a simple reaper, but they were much more numerous and had gold-level equipment. Together, they would be able to win. They surrounded our hero, and each of them began to use their special powers. Suddenly, they opened their mouths and eyes wide with terror as they saw the divine radiance of the stars. The young man attacked his opponents in this manner. He was using the Fallen Hell skill. The blonde man shook with fear and said there was no way that could happen, and added that they lost in an instant. Knight turned his head as he heard a voice saying that it was better to rely on money than people. Huang said with a smile that he had purchased a diamond-level suit worth tens of millions at the Quick Wealth auction. The system message stated that the diamond-level suit had no level, and all stat values, plus 100. Some kid remarked that Quick Wealth is the best auction, and the ticket alone is worth several million, and added that the guy should be the sole heir to Huang's company. And Shafan smiled and told Knight that he would make him kneel this time, then inquired of our hero if he was afraid. But Lin answered nothing to this question. Huan, on the other hand, didn't stop sarcastic. He informed him that it wasn't too late to start begging for mercy. And the guy answered him that no matter how powerful his equipment was, it wouldn't help hide the weakness of his spirit. The young man's opponent became very angry, started running towards him shouting for him to die and used the shadow jerk skill. But Knight was completely unaffected by his attack and bounced away. Xiaofeng couldn't believe it. He didn't understand the technique Lin used, but he was able to dodge. He even caught himself thinking that the priest was not entirely unlike a human, and that he reeked of demonic energy. Huan yelled that there was no such thing, and asked if the guy was pouring everything into agility, and added that his stats were clearly better. He used the Wind Shadow Strike skill and yelled that he was about to finish the guy off. And our hero, with a smile on his face, told his opponent that his stats were too bad since he even missed. His opponent clenched his teeth, frowned, and sweat drops appeared on his face. He didn't know what to say. Knight, on the other hand, gave him a hard look and informed him that it was now his turn, and used the looting technique. Xiaofeng wasn't prepared for such a development. The guy was very confused, and this played into Lin's hands. After a while, a system message appeared saying that Huan had taken 1,000 damage, and the top of his armor was damaged. The full set bonus was gone. The kid couldn't believe it. He was covered in drops of sweat and began to feel the armor with his hands. Literally a second later, he gathered himself, clutched his weapon harder, and wondered if the guy thought to overpower him with it, and began to run towards our hero at a frantic pace, applying on the way such skills as chopping blow, triple decapitation. But he didn't plan to stop there either. At last he applied the Horde Annihilation skill, but Knight was able to dodge all the Otakas easily and safely. He was completely unharmed. He used the skill and flew away from the opponent a few meters away as he was highly enraged. Huan was covered in drops of sweat, frowning, shaking, but he said everything just over his dead body. As suddenly he fell to the ground and began to sway from side to side while yelling what his new trick was. The young man noticed that even his normal basic attack could break through the defense of a scum like Xiaofen and gained a health plus. Knight sat down and said that Huan could just give up and offer compensation. Something like donating gear, apologizing. But Huang interrupted him, frowned, and began to shout that Lin was dreaming and began to swear at him. Our hero didn't listen to this, but attacked the enemy and noticed that another of his skills hit, and then added that his beautiful armor finally broke. His opponent didn't let that stop him either. He started screaming like a madman and asking how Knight even dared to threaten him. Then immediately applied a skill such as Meteor Shower. The young man continued to sit in his seat as if nothing had happened. Xiaofen started laughing very loudly, calling his opponent names, and then asked if he was alive. Just a few seconds later, his expression changed dramatically. His whole body began to twist and he yelled that he was in a lot of pain. Our hero calmly replied that if Huan likes to ride, let him like to drive the sled. He smiled while adding health points, which he couldn't help but be pleased about. The opponent, however, called the guy a scumbag and said that if he touched him again, his father wouldn't even leave a trace of Lin. The young man stared intently in front of him and stated that he hated being threatened the most, and applied the technique of reverse healing as well as looting. The enemy began to scream like a ravening man. Knight smiled and told Huan not to worry as his health had replenished and he could continue. The guy who was standing off to the side and watching everything that was going on screamed in terror. Xiaofeng was still floating in the air. He was coughing, His entire body was covered in wounds and abrasions. Juan's friends remarked that it was just torture. They talked amongst themselves about not provoking Lin anymore. But the one was no longer going to stop, and used a skill called meteor shower. One of the friends started tearing the hair on his head, and shouted if Xiaofeng was alive after such intense attacks. And at the same time, there was a video camera in the bushes, which recorded everything that was happening. As it turned out, the viewers could see everything that was happening. They actively discussed what was happening on the air. Juan's friend looked very badly frightened. His pupils became like dots, and he shouted what kind of skill it was. The viewers who watched the live broadcast marveled at Knight's strength. They also wondered where Xiaofeng drew his courage from. They also noted that the rich man was a very unpleasant man, and there were some who wondered about the value of his armor. The number of spectators increased, and Juan did not calm down. He decided to use force to intimidate others. They watched the fight closely and commented. Most of them supported Lin. Some even wanted to become his disciples. Someone in the chat noted that the brunette looked a lot like his classmate and had a conflict with Xiaofeng. The viewers were very active in the chat room, telling information about our hero. They talked about how the young man had previously sold SSS-level equipment on the forum. The girl with the nickname I'm Not a Seal wrote that it wasn't Lin Knight, as the latter is very modest. It was Sue who didn't know what to do. She was well aware that the guy couldn't hide anymore. She was also worried that many people would want to be on the same team as him. And in Lin's fan group, members wrote good comments in support of him. As for Juan, he got no support. The audience wanted this upstart to be caught and punished. It got to the point where people were demanding that the bandit's father step down. The company was on the verge of bankruptcy. Mumu spoke to her parents about Huang Xiaofeng going too far and asked that they teach him a lesson. But those refused to do it. My mom remarked that the bandit will get what he deserves. And if you use power that doesn't belong to you, then you'll never become a great professional. Sue was very much surprised by her mother's words. The girl opened her mouth and eyes wide with surprise, and then added that if they didn't take action, they'd undermine Knight's reputation. And the parents replied that the kid could handle things on his own. The man sat in a deep chair and asked if Lin had passed the professional test, and then added that it was amazing. He pressed the remote button to pause the recording, and added that the young man's talent must be above legendary level, and remarked that it was very surprising that he had become a priest. And then added that such a once-in-a-century genius should be in the professional league without question. The blonde looked around and asked what those present thought about it, if the guy should be brought in beforehand. One of the women replied that she agreed with such a proposal. The other remarked that the young man should be recruited by him as soon as possible. The bald man smiled and asked Lao Huang why he was still here. Didn't he need to rush to his son? The red-haired guy laughed and said it was no problem for the minister. Huang Tanzio, the branch head of the Alliance of Influential People, Han Company, had been thinking about something for a very long time. He covered with drops of sweat and said that he is still the head of the company, for now added that compensation for Mr. Lin Knight has already been planned. He also apologized for his son. But while the struggle between the young men continued, suddenly a voice was heard asking them to stop. Someone flew in a helicopter and spoke into the loudspeaker for Lin Knight to move away from his opponent. A man with glasses was approaching him, yelling that the head of the company, Juan, wanted to talk to the guy. Xiaofeng cheerfully said that his father had found out everything, and now the young man was finished. There was not much left. Knight, however, asked what the matter was, whether the chairman was trying to intimidate him, and added that he should come himself. The man in glasses bowed, handed our hero a phone where the head of the company, Juan, was on the line, and said that they were ready to compensate for the damage and personally apologize. Xiaofeng shouted as if frantic. How does a guy even dare to bow down in front of this bastard, and asked if he was crazy? He yelled and asked to repeat the sentence again, and wondered if his father wanted to kneel in front of Knight, and added that it was nonsense. After a while, Lin Knight was approached by a man. It was Xiaofeng's father. He observed that his son's act was the result of his neglected upbringing, and added that he was sorry that his offspring had caused so much trouble. Even Knight was surprised by those words, and the man said that words were not enough, and he could ask for any equipment and uniforms. His son, on the other hand, fell to the ground and started rolling around on it. The kid's mouth was foaming. He looked like a spoiled little kid. Our hero agreed to the proposal if the man with him is so sincere, and noticed that he has his own proposal. He smiled and said he wanted 3 sets of diamond-level gear, a set for a priest, a mage, and a swordsman. The guy thought a bit, and added that he wanted 5 million coins, and asked if that was okay with the man. Xiaofeng's brother, who was dragging him away from the scene, opened his mouth wide in surprise. Zhao Jihan was covered in drops of sweat, and thought that 3 sets of diamond armor for different professions would be a bit difficult to find. Huang Tanzio remarked that if a guy wanted 3 sets, he would have to wait a few days, as he didn't have any ready, and added that the alliance was ready to provide resources and assistance. Jihan put Xiaofeng into the helicopter and mentally swore. He was well aware of the fact that he had to deal with everything again. He grasped his glasses with his hand and regarded the sides. They were not easy. Thanks to this, the man very quickly discovered an electronic device, a video camera. Literally seconds later, he was already beside her and reached out his hand to turn it off, but looked directly into the camera, thanked everyone for watching, and noted that Mr. Huang had personally come to apologize and discuss compensation, and added that the details would be tomorrow, on the official broadcast. Our hero thought about the alliance having their eyes on him since they had learned of his talent. Tanzio told the guy that he was willing to provide all the resources from the secret dungeons, and added that there were more than 50 of them. The man noticed that Jiangcheng was not as simple as it might seem. It had many splits and ravines. The young man looked intently at his opponent, and replied that it was no trouble, and 1 month would be quite enough for him. Xiaofeng's brother was very much surprised. He couldn't believe that a guy could clear 50 secret dungeons in a month. He opened his mouth wide with surprise. Even the guard who was standing behind was very much surprised when he heard those words. Tanzio told our hero to come tomorrow night with his companions and he would treat them. Lin said he would make a statement to the forum that Mr. Huang had invited him to dinner. The man frowned and wondered if Knight had already thought this through ahead of time. Sam smiled and said that they had agreed on everything, and thought to himself that the guy's potential was truly limitless. Our hero said he would let Xiaofeng go and remarked that he would not tolerate such a thing again. Jiangcheng replied that Han's family was not so simple, and cruel conditions breed cruel people. The guy said he didn't want to discuss Huan's family and go into such details, as their relationship is not that close. The man thanked him for his understanding. It was the best restaurant in Jiangcheng, officially granted 5-star status. It was always popular, and the chefs at this establishment were masters of their craft. The main feature of this place was that great attention was paid to the quality of customer service. Even one room was allocated for one guest. The hall is home to a service team that is constantly on call, which is where our hero came in. By the way, all guests regardless of their status and the amount of the check in this restaurant were provided with VIP service. Mumu told Lin Ye about being careful, although Mr. Huang apologized to him personally on the live broadcast. The guy told her not to worry and added that there would be no problem. And he thought to himself that Huang Tianqi had fallen at his feet like this only because he had noticed his potential and wanted to establish a relationship beforehand. The restaurant employee opened the door in front of the young men and invited them to enter the room numbered 888. Mr. Huan was already seated at the table. He smiled, asked Knight if he had come and immediately invited him to sit down. Then he asked if the girls were his friends and also invited them to sit at the table and asked the waiter to serve the specialties. Then raised his glass and asked to be allowed to apologize first for his force's misconduct, and added that it was his fault for raising him to be a vicious troublemaker. Mumu opened her eyes wide and thought about the fact that there was no ostentation or arrogance in the man, while Bai thought that reasonableness, politeness, and friendliness emanated from the gentleman. The girls also raised their glasses and reflected on the fact that Mr. Huang, a leading figure in their city, was really acting like this. Lin thought the man was sacrificing his heir and thanked him for his sincerity. And he added, if his son realizes his mistakes and learns to restrain himself, he will forget about this situation, and he shook hands. The guard told Mr. Wan that all preparations were finished, and he allowed them to bring in what was ready. The huge security guard replied that everything would be done, and just a few seconds later, a system message appeared in front of him. It detailed a piece of equipment called the Devil King's Armor. The young man thought about the fact that it was sort of like diamond armor, but not much different from his. And after all, from the outside it might seem like a crude way to profit. But he realized that it was better with it than without it. Our hero smiled back at Mr. Huan and informed him that he was happy with everything and was satisfied with everything. Baiji was very much overjoyed. She opened her eyes wide with surprise and her mouth, stammering her thanks. Su thought about the fact that 3 diamond-level sets at once. It was very expensive, and despite the Huang family's wealth, it couldn't be done just for the sake of preserving reputation. But the girl said the gear was great and thanked the gentleman for it. The entire meeting was broadcast on the air, with viewers marveling at the fact that the company executive had so much respect for this newcomer knight. The company had a lovely evening at the restaurant, and they had a fruitful conversation. Bai enjoyed eating the delicious dishes, the likes of which she had never eaten before. Lin suggested to the gentleman to proceed with the main question. The latter agreed, and noticed that there were a lot of reporters gathered outside, and said he would escort them out. The man also provided a pass to the nightmare-level dungeon Kingdom of Bones, and said that the promised resources would be added later. The young man took the pass in his hand, squeezed it harder, and replied that everything was fine. As soon as people began to leave the restaurant, a huge number of reporters shouted that Lin was out and began to take pictures of him. The guy walked forward, and journalists one by one began to ask him questions. And Huang Xiaofeng was lying in his room all bandaged up, huge drops of sweat appearing on his face. After a few seconds, he opened his eyes, saw the silhouette in front of him, and wondered who else it was. The creature laughed merrily and said that it was him. His supremacy Mei Gao from the abyss, a supreme demon with pure blood and great strength. The kid slanted his eyes to the side and answered through his teeth that he guessed who was in front of him, and asked if demons come to everyone in the form of bedbugs. And Mei Guo thought of the town laughingstock in front of him who was beaten by the priest. He was curious how he could be so proud, and himself told Huan about what is called a strategic retreat, and asked if he was clear. His eyes glowed with red fire. He smiled caustically and asked if Huang Xiaofeng wanted this, and he added that ignorant and foolish people were laughing at him instead of helping him, and his friends and family had chosen to side with the enemy who were mocking him. And then he offered to make a deal with him and said that he would give him a terrifying power. Thanks to this kid, we'll be able to take revenge on all those who humiliate him. But Huang shouted for Mei Guo to get out as soon as possible. The supreme demon said that he would show mercy this time. Xiaofen stood on the bed and declared that he didn't want the favor of a low-level bug, and shouted to give the terrifying power to the poor and losers. Mei Guo paused for a while and pondered over whether to just kill this idiot on the spot. And then he said if Huan would sort it all out and make up his mind, you'd just have to say his name. He smiled and declared that he would hear the call and give the lad the great power of the abyss, and then he would become fearless. It was a secret dungeon, the Land of Bones, level 6 to 10. Its difficulty was nightmarish. Our hero asked Bai how many more chances she has left this week to bring out her talent. Before the young men appeared system messages that the Land of Bones is an abandoned place shrouded in death and surrounded by an army of sleeping skeletons. Those who enter here awaken the monsters with their blood. Ji raised her index finger up and replied that one, since she had already gone to the dungeon twice and used it once. The guy asked her not to rush to use it, but to save it for later. Lin noticed that although the dungeon was a nightmare level, they had a set of diamond armor, but ordinary platinum drops wouldn't do them much good. The young man said about Mr. Huang promising them better resources this week, and added that they had a disaster difficulty level open to them. Knight reported that the only thing they are missing right now is weapons, so if something happens, they will sell everything unnecessary. The guy started telling the girls that they had 3 goals for this dungeon. Firstly, to get free characterization points, secondly, to get weapons, and thirdly, to strategize to mop up the dungeon. Sue squeezed one eye shut, smiled, and said that they would wait for the young man's instructions. A message appeared in front of players that the difficulty level of this dungeon among professionals and players is called Bone Soup. From the following message, they learned that in order to get the SSS pass level, 4 conditions must be met. Firstly, you need to kill the final boss Ghost Rider. Secondly, destroy all the skeletons. The third condition is that you can't use weapons that can suppress all evil things. Also, players had to retain no more than 60% health. Such was the 4th condition. Bai said that it was now clear why this place was called Bone Soup, since the normal and nightmare levels were identical, and added that it shouldn't be so scary with the Holy Sword. Sue smiled and noticed that with 300% deterrent damage, one could still call this level nightmarish. Mumu hugged Ji and told her not to worry, because after they left here they would buy snacks with the money from the sale, and the blonde agreed. Lin laughed and said that he understood and added that he worked here for free. The guy looked around and said that now they were starting to look around. He took his finger into his mouth and bit it with such force that it bled, which is what he needed. The young man lowered his hand down and drops of blood began to drip from the small wound directly onto the ground. The young man thought about using blood to lure all those skeletons out and make them suffer the most hated thing, the Holy Sword. Lin clenched his teeth and applied a skill such as reverse healing as well as a state of constant bleeding. But this was not all. Our hero, in order to consolidate the result, applied the skill state of decay. And as if out of nowhere, a whole horde of skeletons started appearing. They smelled blood. The guy yelled that they had to leave. Mumu put her arm around Bai's shoulders and shouted to the young man to continue onward. Before night, there was a report that the anesthetic pill is taken for injuries to the body. It greatly reduces pain and has no ability to heal or treat wounds. Our hero did not think for a long time, but immediately accepted it because his wounds made his whole body ache. Lin rapidly ran forward, his health level rapidly decreasing. He thought about the fact that the bloodlust of skeletons surpassed the hatred of the holy light. Bei's cheeks turned pink. Drops of sweat appeared on her face and she wondered if they should go to help. Mumu, on the other hand, assured the girl that they should trust Knight completely, and remarked that he would not let them down. And the young man cut his hand again. This he did to make new fresh blood appear. The guy's health level was critically decreasing and was already less than 10%. A system message appeared in front of the young man, stating that the dungeon boundary of the Land of Bones dungeon was in front of him. Our hero ran to her with his last strength and thought about the fact that he had finally gotten to her. Immediately, Lin's health points were added, and a system message alerted him that divine healing had occurred. The skeletons stopped and stared in front of them bewildered. They began to guess about something. The monsters turned around, and Knight calmly told them that it was too late to flee, and applied the divine starburst inversion skill. The young man stood, squinted his eyes, and calmly observed everything that was going on. He applied the fallen heaven and hell skill, and it caused the health of all the skeletons to be reset to 0. The guy walked up to the huge chasm and calmly looked down there. The danger had passed. And there, at the other end, stood the girls and looked at our hero intently. They looked frightened. It was easy to tell by the wide-open eyes and mouths. Knight pressed his lips tightly together and glared at the girls. But he, unlike them, looked completely calm. After a while, he joined Bai and Su. And then he heard a voice come from the cave. It was the skeleton boss asking who had awakened him. He appeared riding a horse skeleton and shouted that he would make bowls out of their skulls and drink their blood from them. A system message with the characteristics of the Ghost Rider appeared in front of the young men. The monster was angry beyond belief, and our hero saw a system message with the word Ogngchar. Lin's eyes burned with the fire of hatred. He clenched his teeth and said that it was all an inversion. He didn't think for a long time, and decided to immediately use the roundup technique so that the monster wouldn't stand a chance. The boss screamed after such intense attacks, and his health level gradually decreased. The monster was very surprised, as it completely unexpectedly lost 500 health points. And our hero got very excited, smiled and noticed a strong crunch that came from the monster. He saw a message that the boss had a life force inversion, a cataclysm, and the level had been increased by another 50%. The next message informed that the Skeleton King did not have critically low HP left. A message appeared again, from which Lin learned that the Undead Wrath passive skill had triggered and the boss's attributes had been strengthened. The monster's skull illuminated with turquoise light, and he screamed in a terrifying voice for his brothers to rise up. A message appeared in front of Knight that all undead were being resurrected, increasing the boss's XP by 100 per second. The young man watched as a huge number of monsters around him were being resurrected, and the boss started shouting very loudly that the stupid people would soon be finished and asked if there were any last words. But the young man was not frightened at all by these words, and began to laugh very loudly. Bai noticed that Lin is so strong, and Su said that monsters are so stupid they don't understand basic math. The boss increases XP by 100 units per second, and Knight doesn't need the forbidden healing power of the Holy Sword. Mumu said with confidence that 3 seconds was enough to finish off the monsters. Health was slowly being added, but used much more, and the undead began to die. The monster opened its mouth in surprise, unable to understand what was going on. And the guy told him he'd better think about those last words, and looked at him hatefully. A message appeared in front of our hero that the boss Ghost Rider of the secret dungeon had been killed, and he received 6,000 experience and treasure chests. The young man had already reached the 8th level, which couldn't be happier. He had done what he had planned, and from the system message, he learned that he had gotten extra points and activated the gear. The girls started shouting to Lin Ye about how cool it was. A message appeared in front of them that they were not being rewarded as they had not produced any activity. After a few minutes, Mumu opened her eyes and mouth wide. She was very much surprised. A system message appeared that the final quest in the secret dungeon Land of Bones has been completed, and the stone sword key reward has been received. It opens a portal to a one-time secret dungeon. Bai shouted, and then asked if she had read it correctly that it was a cataclysm-level dungeon key. A system message appeared in front of Knight asking if he wanted to open the treasure chests, and Su asked with surprise if there was a one-time secret key hidden in the Bone Soup dungeon that hadn't been opened yet. Lin began to examine it, and noticed that it was different from the usual one that came out in the rewards, and then noted that once used, the key, like the rewards inside, disappeared. Ji opened her eyes wide and asked if it was true that at this level, the one-time dungeon rewards were much better than the normal ones. Mumu replied that they were several times more powerful. In addition, unique rewards were sure to appear in them. And boy was I surprised, none of the professionals who passed earlier on SSS were able to stay 100% healthy. Su replied, "Who cares?" and asked her to open the chest faster. Bai was echoing her. The girls were curious about what Lin could do without the luck skill. The young man squinted his eyes. A drop of sweat appeared on his face from the experience. He was curious about it himself. A message appeared saying that the gold-level treasure chest had been opened, and the gold-level skills Great Assassination and Black Iron Fist had been obtained. From the next message, it could be learned that the platinum chest had also been opened, and free characterization points and platinum-level gear, Zoohound and Meteor Staff had been obtained. Our hero said there was nothing for a priest, but this Meteor Staff would suit Mumu and asked if she needed a new weapon. The girls laughed. Sue said it was no big deal, after all. 10 characterization points were good too. A message appeared in front of the guy saying that he had gotten extra points to his intelligence. He also approached Mumu and said that this staff should match her Earth attribute of Master of the 5 Elements. And she asked where they were going next. Lin said that their team was already leading in equipment and results, and he would go through one more time to accumulate experience and reach the 10th level. He asked the girls if they could clear the dungeon solo and remarked that they wouldn't gain SSS, but S would be easy to get. But the main thing was to gain experience. Bai clenched her hands into fists, opened her eyes wide, and stammered a reply that she could. As suddenly our hero pushed aside Mumu and shouted with all his might for the girl to stand. Knight and Sue were very much startled. They opened their eyes and mouths wide as they were not prepared for such a development. The bald dude put a knife to Ji's throat and shouted to Lin Ye if he was the one who took the key to the stone sword. Bandon held Bai down and yelled, "If the young man had any brains at all, he'd better give up the key nicely." Our hero and Mumu stared at the enemy. The girl was very much frightened, and drops of sweat appeared on her face. And the bald man was pleased with himself. He put a knife to Ji's throat and remarked that otherwise she would die. But the girl was not frightened by these words at all, but rather, on the contrary, she became very angry. She started attacking the villain while yelling why Lin should give him the key. The hooded man at the attacker's side frowned, clenched his teeth, and stared intently in front of him. He didn't think for a long time and started attacking Bai. The girl saw it. Drops of sweat appeared on her face. She was scared. Ji held her huge sword in her hands and was about to confront her opponent, but her skills level were not as great as her opponent's, and she fell at the bald man's feet. The hooded bandit noticing that she couldn't be relied upon at all. Our hero looked intently in front of him and told the bandits to let the girl go if they value their lives, and his opponent only laughed and admonished the guy not to be so rude. But his joyful tone changed very quickly. He couldn't understand what was happening to him. The young man used his strength and began to attack him. The man screamed in terror and Bai was able to bounce aside. Baldy, on the other hand, yelled for the hooded man to stay out of it, as he could figure it all out himself. Another bandit who was lying on the ground was calling Knight a lousy guy and yelling how he could do that, when he didn't even have level 10. At the same time, an unknown force grabbed the girl who was in the company of the villains. Lin laughed and replied to the bandit that he would regret his arrogance very soon, and added that he would send him straight to hell. The hooded villain frowned, smiled evasively, and wished that no one from Knight's group was left alive. He added that he would kill the boy first, and there was no point in taking on the girls at all. Baldy started laughing like a lunatic, and noticed that the guy didn't care about the lives of his comrades at all. Sue was covered in drops of sweat. She opened her eyes and mouth wide with fear. She didn't know what to do. But Knight calmly told Mumu and Bai to step back, and added that the aura of the opponents had become demonic, and then stated that those had already finished their deal with the devil. He thought of the fact that they had given up their original gift for the power of the abyss, which was many times stronger than themselves, and decided to apply divine healing, an indulgence of catastrophe. The young man attacked the villains, and there were several of them, as they were not going to back down. The man started laughing and called Lin a scum who doesn't even know how to use his skills, and informed his brother that their opponents were probably well equipped, and cheerfully added that they would take all the loot for themselves. But Knight approached the bald villain with burning eyes and attacked him with all his might. His hooded partner frowned, his face covered in drops of sweat, and he shouted loudly. He went over to another kid and yelled for him to heal faster, but the kid replied that he couldn't do it since he was dead. The man frowned and couldn't understand how a priest who hadn't even reached level 10 could have such a powerful attack power. He even contemplated the fact that the kid had most likely made a deal with the Abyss Devil, and then realized that Lin wasn't exactly an ordinary priest. The bandit thought the bastard didn't even look human, then yelled to run away. Our hero opened his mouth in astonishment and shouted if the opponents had thought of running away, and noted that he would not let the devil's henchman go just like that, and immediately applied the skill Divine Starburst, falling into hell. The villains fled and screamed in terror and fear. Lin thought that by increasing the damage of all the skills, one could deal with a nightmare-level boss with high defense in a matter of seconds, and concluded that they should all die. Sue said if they didn't take action, they would get hurt, and Bai asked if she wanted to destroy the corpses and cover her tracks, then wondered what would happen if the Alliance found them. Guy noticed that no Alliance would admit that traitors were crowding in among them, and added that they were working on their own. They didn't care about their organization. He looked in the bald man's bag and said there was a locked mix of platinum and gold gear. He sighed heavily, and noting that only the fallen could use it, he closed his eyes and thought about something. Just as suddenly, there was a system message that the giant gibbering forest was open. Our hero smiled and thought about the fact that this was a Doom-level dungeon. This made him very happy. The 10th level dungeon, 10th level giant gibbering forest was once used on a test for a profession. No team has cleared this dungeon in years. Boss Dark Caster has become a nightmare in reality for all students, and an obstacle in the path of professionals. Many warriors united to challenge him. Their goal was not to gain experience or first-class equipment, but the key from the Forgotten Lair. It was a drop for the first passage of the level Perdition. The young men walked forward, and Sue noted that there was a giant gibbering forest in front of them. She clenched her fists, opened her eyes and mouth wide, then gasped and asked if they were going to go there. Knight turned his head to her, smiled, and replied that they would do so once Bai Ji's skills recovered, and informed them that their goal was not only to reach level 10, but also the key to the Forgotten Lair. Bai asked what they would do with the dead, because even if they burned them, there would still be traces. Sue suggested burying them. The girl thought for a bit, and added that it would be great if there was a necromancer among them. The young man listened attentively, scratched his head, and could not find the words to reply. Grabbed the baddies, put them on his shoulders, and said he'd rather throw them in the dungeon and have them just disappear after closing. Mumu rejoiced, and remarked that it was a wonderful idea, and then added why she hadn't waited until now, and the young men threw the bandits into the dungeon with a sense of accomplishment. Lin looked at the message and said that they would return to the academy to recover. When Bai's skill recovered, they would immediately open the giant gibbering forest. The girls listened to the guy carefully, smiled, and agreed to his proposal. A day later, the young people were sitting in a cafe. Sue noted that since the time they were preparing for the exam, they had not eaten such good food, and Knight asked her not to worry, because they would have a lot of money and eat well. Ji closed her eyes in pleasure and munched on a variety of goodies. The guy remarked that they could stop by here more often in their free time, and Mumu agreed with him. And then the girl suddenly became sad, and remarked that it was actually better to save money and buy equipment. After all, she was not a child to spend so much on food and entertainment. Bai informed that she had coins too and offered to pay the bill. The girl was a little scared, but the young man laughed and informed them that their team would not be short of funds next time. A waiter came to the table, said hello, and informed them that a certain gentleman had placed an order for their table. Lin was surprised, looked at the man who had done it, and thought about who it was in the first place. The one immediately walked over to the young people, said hello, and informed them that his name was Shangun Yang. He was the head of the Profound Alliance and the head of the Living Sound team. The young man stood up, said hello, gave his name and said he was a student at the academy, introduced the girls and said they were his teammates. The blonde-haired man said he was here to invite them to join the live sound team, and added that they would have a pass to a professional alliance. The young men looked at Shangun Yang in surprise. They didn't expect to hear such a thing from him. Lin immediately replied that he hadn't even taken the professional test yet, and added that in such a situation, other people might say that he had taken someone else's place. He began pouring a drink from the carafe into glasses, and informed them that he couldn't agree, and then remarked that they had no plans to join any team. The man told the guy that he didn't expect him to say no, and added that the strong always have their own considerations. Ian sipped from his glass, and added that he hoped very much that Knight would join the alliance as soon as possible. He smiled and remarked if they needed anything they could contact him anytime, and added that for his own selfish reasons he would like to spar with Lin. Our hero smiled in response, and then said that he agreed with such a proposal, and thought that the person in front of him was quite interesting. The young men gathered in the garden that was behind the academy, and the guy said it was time to start mopping up. So he told Bai to use her special skill, which she did. A system message appeared stating that an unknown power and a special positive effect of the lucky goddess's gaze had been obtained. Knight said he would use the key to open the gate to the giant Ghibli forest. It was clear from the message that the operation was under review. But just seconds later, the dungeon was opened, and the young people were standing in front of the entrance, about to go in there to upgrade and get the rewards. A system message appeared in front of them with the characteristics of the dungeon. The difficulty, level, and history were listed there. Sue said that they say that this forest is a fragment of a secret world, separated from the secret dungeon, and noticed that it can be entered with level 8, but the difficulty here is nightmarish. After a while, the players said in unison about seeing the inhabitants of this dungeon. From the report, it was clear that they are ghostly warriors that have skills such as straight punch, jump kick, throw, and cross punch. Mumu shouted to the young man to leave the two warriors to her and Bai, for they could deal with them. One of the girls applied the bionic tear skill, and the monster's health level, as well as their critical damage, began to decrease. Ji frowned and opened her mouth wide in surprise. All because her attack power had doubled, she was actively attacking the monsters and saw their health rapidly decreasing. Knight shouted for her to be careful of the monsters and dodge their attacks. While he thought to himself that the equipment was indeed proving useful, the girl's capabilities now surpassed most students. Bai was dodging a very strong opponent. She clenched her teeth and fought him as hard as she could. Mumu also didn't sit still. She attacked another monster that was just as strong. Su immediately began to use her special skill, Poison Bubbles. She was very tense. Ji didn't lag behind and used a unique skill like Flame Slaughter. Both of these skills worked quite effectively against the monsters. They were blown apart into several pieces. The young men suddenly froze at the edge. A lilac mist began to spread out from the dark side of the dungeon. Lin shouted for everyone to get ready, and then announced that the boss was already here. A plaque appeared in front of them describing a white spirit rider monster that was quite powerful. The beast was indeed very strong and tall. It was several times larger than its warriors. Knight used the skills of inverting the divine starburst and falling into hell. Mumu watched everything carefully and asked in a stammering voice if it was already over. The guy looked intently in front of him and replied that he hadn't yet, and asked that the girls hold their positions as they needed to increase the damage done by the bleeding. Bei, who was standing off to the side and carefully watching everything that was going on, and the monster was whole and unharmed. It was approaching the young men who were uninvited guests to it. Ji immediately applied skills such as Bionic Tears, Poison Bubbles. Deciding that it wasn't enough, added more Flame Slaughter. The enemy's health began to gradually decrease. A system message appeared that the enemy was poisoned and was under the bleeding debuff. But the monster wasn't simple at all. It was recovering lost resources. All the attacks from Bai with her weapon were nothing to the monster. It appeared that his XP had been increased, and his characteristic values had been greatly improved. Mumu asked if this was a passive skill of the White Spirit Rider, and noted that it became super defensive when the health scale dropped to 1/4. Ji had droplets of sweat on her face, and noticed that this was the first boss. But it was already so difficult. The guy used the clairvoyance technique and said that it was an exceptional skill of the monster, and then said that he would distract him and asked the girls to be careful so that the enemy wouldn't switch to them. The young man hid behind the branches and shouted for the rider to start attacking him, and himself thought about the fact that the position is visible, but the view is clear, and the distance is suitable. Knight concluded that a professional knight would clearly not use ranged attacks such as spear throwing. A system message appeared saying that the boss had used the Lion Barrier skill. It was a special shield that could withstand 300 units of physical damage and magic. And just a few seconds later, he used the Light Thrower skill against our hero. But despite such a strong effort, the guy stood his ground, even though the attack was quite strong. The message that the monster had an inversion of strength appeared again. Its attack power, speed, and defense were greatly increased. And he stood in bewilderment looking at the guy, as his attack was going to do some serious damage to him. The young man used the reverse healing skill and began to attack the enemy. The attack failed and he wondered what to do next in such a situation, and made the decision to use attacking skills against the boss, grab a weapon, and switch to combat mode. Our hero did not think for a long time, gathered his strength, and used the skill flash against his opponent. The boss didn't stand still, but used a reverse clarity technique called grabbing. A message appeared that after using the shimmering stone, all of Lin's characteristic points had been increased by 20 points. The guy got an active skill flicker. With it, you can teleport 10 meters in a specified direction. Our hero smiled and thought about how it was a shame he had already planned this. He began to attack the enemy, and his health level began to decrease very actively. The young man thought about the fact that after the attacks, the boss's skills were over, and now he would need to use melee and attack power. The monster that realized that the time of the Holy Light skill was out for a few seconds froze in place. And then he turned and started to run away. Mumu shouted if it was too late for him to run away. Knight, on the other hand, happily shouted that his skill had recovered just in time. The inversion of the life force cataclysm had also occurred. After a few seconds, there was a message that a divine starburst inversion had happened, a fall into hell. And from the following, the players read that the White Spirit Rider had been defeated, and 8,600 experience points had been gained. Lin's level had been raised to 9th, and Su's level to 7th. Lin said he didn't think the first boss would be so difficult, and added that the dungeon lived up to its name, Perdition. And Mumu understood that without the guy, it would be difficult for them to pass this dungeon even with diamond armor. The young man noticed that there must be a second boss somewhere. He wondered why there was no signage, how suddenly they were captured by a liana plant, and were very much surprised. But the young man immediately realized that it was a special way of teleportation. Knight immediately shouted to the girls to remember to land smoothly, or they would take damage. All turned out well, and the young man announced that they would finally meet the legendary Master of Curses, Suddenly our hero shouted very loudly to his team members to be careful. Mumu opened her eyes and mouth wide and started frantically calling the guy's name. She was really scared. As for Bai, drops of sweat came out from her fear and she screamed loudly. The team members saw a message in front of them that a curse master was in front of them. Judging from the characteristics, this monster was several times stronger than the previous boss. Lin stood a few meters away from him and calmly informed him that he had wished to meet him for a long time. Drops of sweat appeared on the guy's face, and he thought about the fact that it was just as he expected. The monster could attack without even appearing, and if he didn't dodge, there would be a disaster. A system message appeared, revealing that the monster was entering a combat state, automatically enchanting its weapon, which would deal magical damage when it attacked. The Curse Master stood in front of our hero and realized that all of his characteristics were greatly improved. From the next post, players learned that a spell had been used that allowed them to dominate even the tank class. Lin thought his opponent was very fast and shouted for the girls to block the blows instead of dodging. Bai listened to the young man and followed all orders faithfully. The girls began to rapidly lose health. Ji coughed and thought about the monster's immense power, and she also had a feeling that she would die soon. She realized that moonlight energy wasn't the monster's strongest skill. She was hugged by Mumu and began to give the medicine. She was glad that she had prepared them in sufficient quantity beforehand. The guy started to attack the opponent, and Su thought about how Lin couldn't switch to the original priest skills to kidnap them right now. He continued to vigorously attack the huge, formidable boss. After all, it was an important target. The skills Life Force Inversion, Cataclysm, and Capture Technique were applied, and the monster's life force began to slowly decrease. Mumu was surprised that Lin's 3 powerful strikes only reduced the monster's health by a third. She realized that even with the upgraded equipment it would be difficult to deal with it, so she applied her skills. The monster's health, although it had decreased, but only slightly and not critically, this attack made it even more angry. That's why our hero thought that it was time to act dramatically. The young man moved closer to the monster and began to attack it very vigorously. But the monster wasn't going to give up and immediately applied the Rising Dragon Strike. The boss didn't let the guy recover and attacked him again, this time with a triple punch. A few seconds later, our hero's face twisted. He took a critical hit to the neck. It was a critical hit. The monster saw its superiority and wasn't going to stop. The girls were watching carefully. From shock, they could not utter a word, only opened their mouths and eyes wide. Fortunately, our hero recovered very quickly, added health to himself, and with a smile on his face, said that one should not underestimate the power of the Master of Curses, and thought to himself that he needed to be more careful. And the guy immediately applied the grabbing technique. The monster, on the other hand, was not prepared for such a development. He turned his head, and the players could tell from the system message that the priest had provoked the Curse Master. The young man shouted to the girls that they continue according to plan. Mumu replied that she understood. Knight continued to capture the enemy and thought about his task to continue growing him further, while Su and Ji dealt damage. The young man was well aware that he needed to let the monster use all the skills. After all, he was exactly the kind of enemy that only fed on skill damage. A smile appeared on Lin's face, and he thought about the fact that even at the perdition level, the health value and defense were greatly increased, so they needed some time. The monster looked confused. There was a report that it had shifted its attention. His health gradually decreased, and the Curse Master himself walked towards Bai, who was hiding behind a tree. Like that, there was a life force inversion, a cataclysm, and the monster lost a lot of health points. Knight stepped forward and shouted for the Master of Curses to remember that he was the one who was his opponent. He looked intently in front of him and added that he would always protect his comrades, and then shouted for the monster to die and applied the skill Glory of Stars, Fall into Hell. Health level became critical. The monster struggled to hold onto its weapon. Just a little more, and it would collapse. A system message appeared saying that the monster had been killed, and they had gained 9,300 experience points, and the level of perdition was being reduced to nightmare level. Our hero watched carefully at everything that was happening. He opened his eyes wide with surprise. He read that the last mission had been completed. The boss had been defeated without taking a single damage, and the reward of summoning the Curse Master had been obtained. Bai approached the guy and said that he had killed the monster so quickly, and asked if he could summon the Curse Master, and added that the difficulty of the dungeon had decreased. The young man smiled and informed that it was their overall victory. While he himself realized that no one had ever defeated this boss, it was hard for him to imagine the reward they were going to get. After all, they had managed without injuries and a luck buff. As here, Mumu yelled for everyone to look at what the system was showing that it wasn't the end, and asked what else could be there. A system message appeared informing you that access to the disaster-level dungeon Forgotten Lair has been granted. The players read that they have fulfilled the dungeon's requirements, and soon the Watcher of Original Sin will open the door for them. Sue was startled, and Knight asked her if she had forgotten that their goal was to get the key to the Forgotten Lair. He squinted and added that by completing hidden tasks one could gain clearance, then suddenly said he didn't know how it affected other professionals. Mumu remarked that they were only helping and wouldn't have to worry about the Curse Master, and Lin said he was just wondering if they had enough training to do it. The young man said that the remaining enemy was the last giant deep in the forest, and he thought to himself that the scenery of this forest was really amazing. And the second monster was the strongest monster in the entire dungeon, and this one though big but the stupidest with weak techniques. It was the last giant. No one knew the reason it was here, and there were other characteristics in the description as well. Bai screamed that the monster was so huge and then asked what they should do. Lin informed that the most important thing was not to panic. The guy said that the monster has a slow attack speed and can only walk by swinging back and forth, and added that the enemy might try to step on them. Ji already wanted to attack him, but Knight asked her not to. The young man noticed that they would also be using the same tactics this time, and wondered how about asking Mr. Master of Curses to help them. And our hero very quickly summoned the Master of Dark Curses. He began to approach them. Players learned from a system message that a level 15 Curse Master is just as powerful as he was when they fought him. Lin frowned and shouted loudly for him to attack the huge beast, and the two monsters met. The huge monster even froze in bewilderment for a few seconds. And just a few seconds later, he got hit by moonlight. It was very strong. He fell down and his health level decreased. His opponent didn't wait for him to regain consciousness, but struck a giant blow. Knight shouted for Mumu to attack directly, and Bai helped her with skills. A system message appeared in front of the players saying that the attack power of the entire team has been increased. Sue applied the skill Fire Sword Energy and then her favorite Bionic Tears. The attacks were very strong. The monster's health level was rapidly decreasing. Lin shouted that it was time to finish and used his skill called Falling into Hell. A system message appeared saying that the boss of the last giant of the secret world had been defeated, and 8,000 points had been gained, and Knight's level had been raised to 10th, and Sue's to 8th. The young man's eyes lit up with joy. He wasn't even prepared for such a development. And Mumu folded her fists and shouted happily that the guy was now level 10. A message appeared saying that all the hidden tasks had been completed, and that was why experience points would be doubled. Bai happily said that it was the first time she had seen such a thing. The reward was being counted. Under the influence of the skill of the lucky goddess's gaze, the treasure chest obtained was upgraded to diamond level. And also players received a platinum level chest. Immediately a message appeared whether they wanted to open treasure chests. The girls hugged each other, and Mumu shouted that Bai's skill was so useful, she was insanely happy. And Lin calmly pointed out that this was why he had taken Ji on their team, as he saw the potential. A message appeared saying that the diamond chest had been opened and a diamond level skill had been obtained, and all participants received 15 free characterization points. A platinum treasure chest was also unlocked, and players received 15 free characterization points and platinum level gear. Giant's Heart added 15 points to all stats, and had the active skill Giant's Strength. Lime Core adds shield penetration to the weapon and also increases the weapon's physical attack. Lightning Scroll adds additional magical lightning damage to the weapon. The White Spirit Rider's Cuirass, the armor a knight needs, increases strength and build. White Spirit Rider's Spear, a weapon that also comes in handy for the knight, increases strength, has the effect of a light throwing spear. Tide of the Blue Sea is an exclusive priest skill that restores health to all allies. Our hero rubbed his beard and reported that the last skill was quite good. He liked it. Suddenly a strong wind came up from an unknown source. But the young man stood still and thought about something. A system message about the Blue Sea Tide inversion has appeared. It causes a wave of death to sweep across the field. The young man thought about the fact that his inversion talent didn't improve any of the skills that originally benefited the team. He realized that he was losing control after the inversion, but he increased his speed. After Tide of Blue Sea transformed into a skill that dealt damage, the debuff status would only increase the enemy's debuff. The young man looked intently in front of him and thought about the fact that it could be a decrease in characteristics, health, as well as dizziness and such. From the message, the guy learned that the Blue Sea Tide skill had been learned, which he couldn't help but be excited about. I thought to myself, let it be a reminder to pay attention to learning Dispel skills for the sake of developing control. Knight thought about what had been said about how, if a talent reached an advanced level, it could change its nature. He smiled and made the decision that he would have the last word, and he would change it as he wished. And Lin told the girls that they would sort out the rest of the drops as they left, and added that he would like to inform Chang Yuan Yishangguanyan about the disappearance of the Dark Curse Master and the dungeon level decrease. And then our hero pointed out that it would most likely cause a huge stir again. The next day, the academy principal couldn't believe that Lin Knight had killed a curse master in the giant perishing forest. He asked his opponent if he understood correctly about the perdition-level dungeon. He noted that the guy contacted him after the sweep, and the Alliance confirmed it all. Ian noticed that only 73 professionals had set foot in this forgotten lair. 24 of them died inside. All the rest chose to give up halfway through. No one made it past the halfway point. The man added that no one took it up a second time. It wasn't even a matter of wanting to, but that they simply couldn't handle the onslaught. Mr. Huang remarked that they would wait until the guy was stuck at level 15, and the Alliance would do everything to help such a talented pro, but it would all depend on the guy after entering the dungeon. The principal remarked that everything is just fine, and then added that all students owe Knight a debt of gratitude. The old man said that they should hold a meeting and reward the guy, and then mentioned that he had already brought up the topic of sealing the entrance to the dungeon, but all parties were against it. The man in glasses remarked that students who cannot face such challenges should be weeded out, and added that the Alliance will not raise garbage who are not fit to be professionals. The principal said he was just pondering, and then said they had already expelled several students because of him. Ian waved his fan, clucked, smiled, and said it wouldn't happen again. Mumu burst into the principal's office, apologized, held out her cell phone, and said they had some problems. There was a post on the Pro Forum about Lena. The girl said that the news they broke to the Alliance had spread all over the forum. The girl said that Knight is an outstanding student of the Academy, he is a future professional who was chosen by the Alliance, and added that he is the future of the Academy. She was shaking all over and begged the principal to do something about it. He replied that they understood her worries. Ian frowned and said that he would verify all the information provided. He opened the forum, and there in the comments about the young man wrote that he was a villain, and most likely made a deal with the devil. Someone posted about having connections, his father taught Knight, and confirms that he has a connection to the Deovul. The men got very tense as most of the readers demanded that the guy be tested. The principal told Sue that he would go with her to check out the situation with this teacher. Mr. Huang laughed and remarked that it was hard to tell if that teacher even existed. Ian squinted his eyes and said that it was most likely a fabrication of the Alliance opponents, and added that they needed to issue a joint statement, and then added that it probably wouldn't be enough. Suddenly, Knight walked into the room and said he wanted to take a test for the presence of demonic energy. It was reported on television that the Alliance has strongly criticized the rumors, and that what the Academy teachers were saying was a brazen lie. The men said the rumor monger had pleaded guilty, and Lin had no connection to the devil. In the headquarters of the Alliance gathered a huge number of journalists. A huge number asked questions to our hero. He stared intently in front of him, and heard the question of whether he had come to take the initiative to conduct a demonic energy test. The journalists were covered with drops of sweat. They were very nervous and anxious. The young man began to walk away from them and calmly said that you can't be a reporter with such timidity. The journalists started arguing among themselves, asking why they were suddenly so frightened. Someone noticed that a colleague doubted the Alliance. They were asked to calm down as they were on air. Lin entered the places where demonic energy detection is conducted. The man told the guy to enter the sacred judgment circle and wait. The young man obeyed the man and began to remove his outer clothing. A system message appeared that the demonic energy check had begun. A man who was standing a few meters away from our hero noted that Knight doesn't have to do that, and added that some people just don't want to acknowledge his superiority, and then added that most professionals just believe in the young man's strength. The young man smiled and said that he had also thought about it, remarked that he was also very interested, and then added that he doesn't really care about the allegations, and remarked that he just wants the people around him to stop being afraid and worried about him. The man said they hoped the results would be good, or they would have to arrest him. Lin agreed. Our hero closed his eyes and waited for his testing to finally be over. The men watched the process closely, drops of sweat on their faces from overexertion. A message appeared saying that the check was successful, and the value of demonic energy in Knight's body was 0%. No agreement with the devil was detected. The young men got very excited, and the oldest among them said that was excellent, and added that he would print out the report now. The people who were watching the live broadcast shouted that such a thing couldn't happen, that Lin didn't have demonic energy. Others started posting comments about what the haters were going to do next. Knight said he is now going to publish his specs and gear, and if anyone doubts it, they can join him in battle and check it out in person. Juan was freaking out and yelling why everyone believed it, because the guy was scum, and he was bewitched by black magic. He was running somewhere and muttering to himself that he had to warn them. Our hero was walking down the street, a calm smile on his face, and there was someone watching him around the corner. It was Xiaofan, who was thinking about how Knight had fallen so low that he was buying tea and not paying the bills. After a minute, he started talking about where Lin had gone and swearing he was at a loss. The boy hit him and asked if he was a criminal on the run, and Huan shouted that it was insidious. The young man remarked that it was far more insidious to pursue. Xiaofan turned to the young man and said, "It is not for Knight to say what is good and what is bad." And then he came closer and asked if the guy had met any similarly possessed demons of the abysses or something. Our hero was surprised and replied that he hadn't. And he himself remembered the event in the dungeon and thought about the fact that he had sent 2 such fools back. Huang started shouting for Lin not to be rude to him. After all, he was the one who let the young man enter the dungeon, and then the abyss came after him, and added that he wanted to tell the Alliance about it to evict the demon. The guy was surprised and asked if he wanted to say that the demon of the abyss had taken a fancy to him, and he had not only resisted the temptation, but had done it on purpose. Xiaofan hummed and remarked that some rats that dare not even appear in the human world could make him surrender. He screamed that he was born to be the main character. He had money, beauty, strength, and didn't need low-grade help. Lin looked at him and thought about the fact that he had knocked him out of first place. But what annoyed him the most was his opponent's characterization. The young man thought about the fact that Huan was able to resist the demon's temptation in spite of that, and he was very impressed by that. He went and said that he also hated the demons of the abyss, and the talents he possessed were unavailable to them, and remarked that he hoped the kid would get that, but he yelled that he didn't believe it. Our hero thought of contacting Huang Tianqi again to put his son under house arrest again, as he is very annoying. Lin Ye received a message that the guy who was spreading untrue rumors about him had been caught. The club supporting Knight wrote about that liar even reselling the guy's leadership. The young man wondered who it was, and it turned out to be Chao Yuan from their class. Young ordered that the villain be blacklisted so he could sell and buy gear, and asked that the evidence be scanned for him so he could publish a post on the forum. The man who wrote the message noticed that the boys wanted to teach him a lesson themselves. Lin, however, ordered him not to, and then added, if Cao was caught, he would tell the secret strategy for passing the secret dungeon locations, and with that, any dungeon could be passed. And recorded voiceover that a dungeon walkthrough guide for the Land of Bones dungeon will be released soon, and said you can check out a preview. A huge message appeared. Classmates were shocked that the dungeon could be passed with health. Knight posted that he needs students to be notified that anyone who buys or distributes pirated copies will no longer be able to get his manuals. It was posted online that all pirated copies of Lin's manuals would be removed. Bai had read that anyone who wanted to distribute them again would be blacklisted and unable to receive any future guidance, and accomplices would also be blocked. The young man gritted his teeth reading such a message, and thought that now there was no way to save money. But there were some users who agreed with Cao Yuan and considered him a hero. A dispute started between users, for most believed that the labor was stolen from Lin by a thief and profited from his gigantic labor. There were some students who thought that everyone twisted as they could. This was the case for Yuan. Those on our hero's side rejoiced that they would have a trial version of the new manual. Some users wanted to join Knight's team, so they could also get the guides first. The girls who read the chat were very surprised as they read that the new guide would only be available for purchase and copies would be deleted. A young man was walking up the steps, and the chat was writing about getting other users to join the group, as new guides would be coming out. And the number of subscribers increased rapidly, because it wasn't just a fan group for Lin. Guy, on the other hand, thought about why the number of subscribers had increased so dramatically, and came to the conclusion that sometimes a point is more effective than a fist. He was happy that this way he could stabilize his source of income, and said it was time to sort out the stats. A system message appeared in front of the guy, showing his characterization. He was very surprised as there was an exclamation mark next to the awakened talent, and he clicked on it. A message describing the skill opened in front of the young man. He began to read carefully, and thought that he would postpone the question of improvement for now, and deal with it after the professional test. He thought about the fact that after overcoming the 10th level, his intelligence approached 150, and he set a goal to reach the same amount but without bonuses to pump dexterity, spirit, physique, and strength. So he started chatting to Zhao Jihan about needing weapons, necklaces, and greaves. The man wrote about how he can't fulfill all the requirements, but he will still try. 10 minutes later, the young man sent the inventory and wrote that Lin could choose anything he had at his discretion, and he thought that the weapons could be sold and the greaves were not suitable. So he wrote that he needed a priest's weapon, and added that he needed stones to forge level 10 gear. Zhao asked that he couldn't get it all right now, and there was a pause in the chat for a while. Knight thought about the fact that he couldn't tell the man that he was going to the Deadlands, but the one wrote that he would try to organize everything as soon as possible and wrote the cost of forging and previous equipment. Our hero paid the required cost. A system message appeared with a description of the bone necklace. The young man was also able to familiarize himself with the characteristics of the Whitebird Jade pendant. Knight had gotten the star staff of healing that he so desperately needed when traversing the dungeons. He was very happy to have his inventory replenished, and so he immediately decided to forge on. The young man was well aware that this required certain skills and strength, so he was focused. The forging was successful. His demonic emperor outfit, star healing staff were forged to level 10. As for the bone necklace and the white bird jade pendant he wore, he had also chained them to the 10th level. Knight looked intently in front of him and thought to himself that this should suit him for the moment. He thought about the fact that with this level of equipment, obtaining the SSS rank in the Land of Death should be enough, because in such a dungeon, the loot was either very good or very bad. Suddenly the young man heard some noise and became very tense. He couldn't understand what was going on. The guy went to the noise and saw the girl in front of him, scratched his head and called her name. Mumu got very scared and blushed and thought about why he came home without a sound. She was using his bathroom since hers didn't have working hot water. Knight blushed, scratched his head, said it was okay and whether he should turn away. Sue said it was fine and asked if he had a minute since she wanted to talk to him. The guy agreed, but asked to dry his hair and change his clothes first so the girl wouldn't catch cold, and she agreed. Mumu asked the young man to wait just a few minutes, and he agreed. Lin asked what was the matter and why she was so serious. Sue remarked that Bai had complained that she didn't like the two-handed swordsman class, and added that the one didn't suit her in many ways. Each remarked that it was still difficult with Ji's new gear, and the young man said she hadn't said anything to him, and added that he'd seen her handle a big sword pretty easily. The young man said that if he could find a hero certificate that allowed her to change classes, Bai would be able to choose something more suitable. Yi added that he will ask Huang Tianqi about it later, but Ji needs to be sure if she wants to change her class. Sue remarked that it's great, and she feels better, and will be back soon. Knight asked if there was anything else she wanted to say, and it wasn't just about Bai. Mumu stopped, lowered her eyes and didn't know what to say to the guy's direct question. The young man said he was asking about her. The woman shouted that he was a fool, and then asked how he had figured her out. And then she asked him not to laugh after she said something to him. He started laughing and the girl got even angrier. She calmed down a bit and noticed that he was level 11 now, and since he had awakened the talent, they had grown distant from each other. Sue thought she knew that, but she herself said that they had practically been together since they were kids, and she added that she thought that even after the talents were awakened, they would still be the most cohesive and reliable partners. Mumu noted that she felt like he didn't need her anymore. He could earn hidden rewards on his own and become the center of attention. The girl said she was just following his commands, doing little things he could easily do himself. Tears flowed from her eyes and she went on to say that she was happy for him. But the gap between them was getting bigger and bigger. And when they were in the dungeon, she just felt like a burden and couldn't be a pillar of the team. The guy put his hand on Mumu's head and remarked that she was overthinking it, and she replied that he was stupid and didn't understand, and said he didn't know what it was like to try to keep up with someone, only to feel increasingly helpless. Sue was quiet for a while and stated that she no longer wanted to continue to depend on him. Lin raised a finger up and said, if that was the case, then she needed to become more disciplined, and she needed to start from today. Namely, no snacking and late dinners, but early rising and practicing. Mumu screamed. She wondered if agility wasn't just about accumulating points. The guy asked if she thought she had enough points. He held out his hand with some object and told her to take it. Sue was very surprised as it was the heart of a giant. She could not believe that the young man was giving it to her. Lin remarked that this item was perfect for use in transition and could double in effectiveness, and added to make her believe in herself, for her talent with class had limitless potential. And Mumu agreed that snacking was off limits from today. Knight thought the girl needed solid support to grow up. She hugged him and had the guy test the potential for bionic tears. And then she added that she could give massages, cook, clean, and became like a playful cat, and noted that she hoped the young man would enjoy it. And he began to scream very loudly. And at this time, Bai was standing near the open door, but it was unknown when she heard the young people's conversation. She entered the room and Mumu immediately asked if Tia was here. Lin thanked her for coming and added that he appreciated it. Ji asked the guy if he was going to the Land of Death right now and wondered if he wanted another day to rest. A system message appeared in front of Lin that he had been granted an unknown power granting a special buff, and he told Bai that he had rested enough and the girls should take a break. Added that they should watch the movie and use the stone key to summon a one-time secret realm and open a portal. A message appeared that the highest difficulty level had been selected, and the young man announced that he had gone. Mumu looked very scared, for she saw that this dungeon-level disaster. It was clear from the system message that this was an extreme difficulty level, and the difference between the net level and the dungeon level was too great. The guy thought about the fact that there were no traps, no instant death, and it wasn't what he expected. One by one, system messages began to appear, that his energy had awakened the monsters, and they were awakening. A notification appeared that an entire legion of undead were advancing on the young man. A huge army of undead awakened, and they began to approach our hero. A report has surfaced that the holy saber crown of red flames has materialized, and with it, the young man gains incredible power. Lin, on the other hand, thought about the fact that he wouldn't use it while going through the dungeon. But the messages didn't end, and a list of special conditions for passing the country of death appeared before him. The young man immediately used the star flipping skill after familiarizing himself and began to attack the monsters. Those began to shout that he was not human, as humans cannot summon the flames of hell. Knight shouted loudly, the coup de grace of divine healing, disaster descending. And literally in 1 second, an entire legion of undead was destroyed. That's 1,304 monsters. The boy smiled, for it was just as he thought. With the upgraded equipment and characteristics, the celestial robes gave a 90% increase to healing. The undead party was mopped up in 1 second and didn't need the blue sea tide ult, but a message arose that alerted that a new wave of undead army had appeared. He took the medicine in his hand and thought about how he really should thank his two good teammates. A message appeared in front of Lin that he had used the acceleration potion to increase his speed, and the Wind Falcon egg pill to temporarily increase his agility. He began to run forward, while a huge number of monsters roared and tried to at least reach him, and the young man decided to use the skill of turning the tide of the blue sea. A system message appeared in front of the guy saying that all enemies were in a soul-burning state. The attack power of all enemies was weakened. He also familiarized himself that the altar of death is a strange structure that continuously summons an undead creature from the underworld. But that wasn't all, as the zombie butcher was a very mysterious, yet dangerous creature. The young man took advantage of the coup de grace of the art of clarity, and brought the butcher under control, and thought about the 30 seconds he now needed. He directed a huge number of monsters at the monsters, and ordered them to kill them. The young man also utilized a skill such as the coup de grace of the healing arts, a kidnapping technique. And then Knight immediately used a skill such as star flipping, inner hellfire. The altar of death had been destroyed. The summoning of the undead in that area had been stopped. The report attested to that. The young man immediately used a skill such as the abduction technique against the monsters. From the next system message, our hero learned that the divided zombie butchers had been defeated. The Skeleton King and the Eternal Lich had awakened. Lin thought about the fact that even on the disaster difficulty level, with the current restrictions, it wasn't as scary as it seemed, and with his current abilities and equipment, solo playthrough was quite possible. And the young man shouted for the Master of Curses to come out, as he was the one he needed this time. A message appeared that a level 15 Cursed Dark Knight had been summoned. Our hero saddled him like a horse. Suddenly there was a message that there had been an awakening of the undead. The young man stood on the back of a huge dragon and flew forward, but he didn't think of stopping. After a while, he stopped near a huge throne where another monster sat. It was a Skeleton King. He was the one who strengthened the surrounding undead creatures, and he also used hordes to hunt down enemies. An Eternal Lich who willingly accepted the realm of death, he turned himself into an undead using dark and necromancer magic. He is much smarter than typical undead creatures. He was also standing in front of Lin, but the young man slammed his weapon on the ground and shouted to his huge helper that they must be killed. The guy heard someone call him Master. He let out a heavy exhale and let out a curse. After a few seconds, our hero held his hand up and told the knight that he could begin his task. The Eternal Lich opened his eyes wide with surprise and his huge mouth with scary teeth, and the knight threw himself into the attack, but our hero used a skill called Moonstrike. The monsters that were nearby began to shriek with fear, for they were sure of their own superiority. A huge curse shield appeared in the knight's hands. It was capable of reflecting all magic damage received in 3 seconds back to the source. The Eternal Lich began yelling with all his might for the Skeleton King to help him, the monster shaking with fear. And the monster sat on his throne, his eyes burning with green fire. He only opened his maw wide. But Knight tapped his weapon on the floor and noticed that his opponent was him. The guy also used the skill of flipping the tide of the Azure Sea, the Sea of Undead. Reports began to appear one after another that the Skeleton King was falling into a state of withering, and then into a state of weakness. The knight applied the dragon's upward strike, 3 consecutive strikes, and the monster only awed. But the attacks didn't end there either. The Curse Blast skill was applied, and the Skeleton King screamed. The Eternal Lich's jaws twisted. He opened his already huge eyes wide and shouted that it was a black hole. He began to attack the knight of our hero. The latter was able to dodge at the last moment, but still, he was hit a little bit. The Eternal Lich was very happy about this and started laughing merrily. He already felt victorious. But Knight attacked the monster. Knight shouted to his assistant to be careful as the undead were going to self-destruct and take him with them. A violent explosion happened. A system message appeared saying that the undead lich had sacrificed his own soul, nullifying all remaining health points, releasing ice magic in a wide radius and dealing damage. The knight stood beside the skeleton king, whose health level was already at 0, and informed Lin that target 1 had been eliminated. The guy looked at what was left of the monster and remarked happily that it was a great job. Suddenly there was a breeze, and our hero calmly spoke of disaster descending, and the monster was saying with his last strength that he was an ignorant man in front of him, and the real despair was ahead. A system message appeared stating that by destroying the skeleton king and the eternal lich, Knight had met the basic requirements for completion. The young man walked over to the knight and used a healing spell to restore him. The knight began groping himself with his hands to check the integrity of his defenses, and the guy used a clarity spell. He then pointed his weapon at the altar of death in order to destroy it as quickly as possible. A report of a dark winged dragon, former partner and associate of the dark cursed knight who abruptly summoned him, has surfaced. The young man told the knight that with the destruction of the altar, the undead creatures were no longer a threat, and they would simply finish their purge and leave for the next location. The young man looked intently in front of him and announced the last 2 bosses left, and then added that it should be done by the knight to save the time and effort of moving and destroying monsters. As suddenly a huge monster started screaming very loudly and approaching our hero. Toth informed his aide to be careful as they had been spotted by the enemy, and the monster approached them and began to yell as if it was not its own voice, about to devour them. But at the very last moment they were able to dodge and stood back looking at him. It was a great dragon of death. It was revered while alive, was resurrected by the king of the dead of the necropolis after death. This information was listed in the system message. As for strength, endurance, ear, and agility, these metrics were unknown. It shone with huge eyes and canted its large maw, and behind it was another monster. The system message indicated that this was the daughter of death. She was originally a pathfinder from the elf race. Lin asked the knight which was scarier, him or the one-time secret dimension, and then pointed out that he wouldn't let anyone reach the SSS level. He bounced to the side and applied skills such as Reverse Starlight, Illuminating Fallen Hell, Reverse Azure Flow, and Sea of Undead. The daughter of death squinted one eye and said he was a despicable human ant, and asked how dare they attack from around the corner. Knight looked intently in front of him and asked if they wanted to turn the tide of battle, and noted that he would show what a real surprise was. Our hero began to attack the opponents, and with such force that in different directions flew stones, dirt, and dust. The daughter of death laughed and remarked that the young man's attack wasn't bad. The guy, however, caught the arrow that she aimed at him with his hand, giving him a boost in health points. The monster shrieked and yelled that it was impossible. After all, her arrow had hit the young man exactly in the heart. How is it that the skill was ineffective? Is it really immune to submission? And she told the great dragon of death that the opponents had something strange and ordered him to attack first. The one immediately obeyed the daughter of death and began to attack the opponents. But to his great surprise, Lin's health points only increased. The young man stood calmly and looked at his opponents. He didn't even think of running away somewhere. The daughter of death drew the bowstring of her bow to fire, while a knight watched from the side. Literally seconds later, he was in front of her to intercept the arrow. The monster was really pissed off by this, and she thought about how this guy couldn't be allowed to get any closer, and shouted very loudly for all undead to listen to her orders, and they were to block the enemy. The monsters actually tried to grab the huge knight, but they failed. He threw himself at the daughter of death, and the latter screamed in a voice that was not her own. A skill such as silence magic was applied, and the monster's health level was rapidly decreasing. The monster stared intently in front of her, the vessels in her eyes popping from the strain, and then screamed that they were stupid traitors and could only fight in close combat. She grabbed a knight, attached some sort of object to his back, and screamed that she would make them kill themselves. It was a talisman that controlled a living being, and the weaker it was, the longer the control time. And through this device, a suicide command was sent for the creature to commit suicide. The daughter of death drew the bowstring and shouted that although it was only a second, it was enough. She started attacking the knight. The knight couldn't understand what was happening. His health level was decreasing. Knight saw all of this and yelled at him with all his might to switch into a protective stance as soon as possible. The knight began to summon a black shield, greatly reduced in speed due to its weight. Damage was reduced by 70%. The daughter of death resented the fact that her opponent had taken so many attacks and remained alive, but promised to bypass the shield and finish him off. She put that into practice very quickly and began to attack the knight, his health level rapidly decreasing. The monster noted that the enemy had no more health and she would deal with him very soon, then take on the companion. Literally seconds later, the daughter of death cringed as she was affected by the reverse ghost binding spell. Our hero looked at her intently and wondered what she had just said. He unblocked the negative effect, the knight began to regain health, and the guy asked who was going to deal with who here. The daughter of death, who couldn't disentangle herself from her bindings, cried out that this was happening. She looked at our hero and couldn't understand why he was still alive. But he wasn't going to answer that question. The young man applied interruption skills as well as a growing dragon strike. The boy looked intently at the dragon daughter and said that all the stars were shining. Before he could finish, there was a huge explosion and only shreds flew in different directions. After a few seconds, a message appeared in front of the young man saying that he had killed the dragon of death. The daughter of death began to call out to him very loudly. She was so confused she couldn't find the words, and then screamed as much as she could that the opponents had no fighting ethics at all. Our hero was completely calm. He summoned the Spirit Reversal Cure skill and Descending Calamity. There was a very strong explosion. Pieces of rocks, dust, and dirt flew in different directions. This was Lin's way of dealing with the daughter of death. He told the knight that he would deal with the northwest, but he himself chose the southeast and ordered that it should be cleared quickly. The guy thought about the fact that if they completely cleared the altar, it would be over quickly. Because although the dungeon was special, it wasn't as difficult as expected. He applied the skill Reversing the Tides of Azure Sea, Sea of Undead, and reflected on the fact that they could clear the dungeon in less than 10 minutes, and they had more than enough time. After a while, the young man stood on a mountain of skeletons that no longer posed any danger. Guy received a notification that he had destroyed the remaining undead creatures in the Land of Death and completed the first 4 quests. He stared intently in front of him, and the thought that something was wrong here gave him no peace of mind. A notification appeared that the avatar of the two-winged angel Kuro was about to descend, and that the 5th specific quest, Choosing Destiny, had been unlocked. And a few seconds later, Knight saw huge white wings that were rapidly approaching. A system message appeared saying that he had the choice to accept divine favor, accept the reward from the two-winged angel Kuro and give his souls to the undead, and then leave the earth. After a while, the notification appeared again. It was suggested to kill Kuro's shadow avatar. Our hero thought about what it all could mean. If there is another hidden boss in this dungeon, and in front of him appeared again a notice to make a choice. The guy had read that if he successfully killed the angel avatar Kuro, he would get a Q-level rating. He was surprised that the SSS rating, it wasn't the highest rating in the dungeon. The young man wondered if this information was known to the other adventurers, or if they were hiding it. The young man looked in front of him and had a lot of thoughts in his head. Suddenly, the system message that the Dark Cursed Knight had left the battlefield appeared in front of him again. A summoning recharge had occurred. Knight thought about how overwhelming the pressure was, but according to the notice, he wouldn't have to face the creature. The young man began to look around to see Kuro's avatar, and he succeeded. A characterization notice for the two-winged angel Kuro appeared. It was not recommended to fight it, and the abilities were hidden. He smiled at our hero and told him that he had done well, and added that he represented the Holy Realm to show his gratitude and the undead should rest in the ground forever. Kuro added that Lin should leave the Holy Sword, the Crown of Scarlet Flame, and could leave. But the guy asked if he wasn't due some kind of reward since he had handled all the undead creatures here. The angel got angry and asked if the young man was questioning his words, and added that a man should have a heart full of gratitude, and told the lad to go away and not interfere with his work. Knight didn't think the angels here were so lofty and used humans as cannon fodder, so he asked if there was anything else here that needed mopping up, and then added that the credit belongs to him, why then it should be Kuro, and used the universe flip skill. The angel called the young man an insignificant ant, and added that serving the great holy kingdom is the highest reward for mankind, and the guy is full of greed and defying the divine decree. The expression on the angel's face changed very quickly, all because our hero had applied the loot skill. The young man frowned, glared at Kuro, and shouted at him to shut up. These words made the angel very angry, and he shouted very loudly for the divine power to fall. There was an explosion of such force that huge stones sprinkled in different directions. But our hero remained unharmed. Only his hair stirred from the force of the shockwave. Kuro's eyes burned with hatred, and he shouted that he had revealed our hero's weaknesses. He attacked Knight with all his might, using the skill crown of Scarlet Flame, Direct Strike. A huge sword pierced through the young man's body, and he used the Heaven and Earth flip skill. It would seem that our hero's days are numbered, but no. His health level recovered very quickly. Angel was very angry. He furrowed his eyebrows and clenched his teeth so hard that drops of sweat appeared on his face, and then shouted for the young man to not even think of using sneaky tricks to avoid divine punishment. But our hero didn't listen at all to what Kuro was telling him, and carried out the lightning call. his health level increased significantly again. The guy through gritted teeth applied the star-flipping skill. And the angel would not be appeased. He spoke of a creature like the ant seeking death, and shouted that Lin was about to see what happens when you defy a holy angel. Knight thought about how his opponent had seemed intimidating at first, but now he didn't seem so smart anymore, and he had the opinion that it was just a projection and not a real body. Kuro shouted, "How was this possible? Physical attacks or magic, ranged or short-range skills?" He wondered why the man wasn't taking damage, but rather constantly healing. The guy had his health points added again and thought about the fact that someone who had seen him defeat previous bosses wouldn't ask such a question. Angel asked if the young man was invulnerable, then shouted that there could be such a thing, that Lin Ye had an invulnerability skill. Knight replied that he had the skill, and all Kuro could do was rip out a strand of his hair or rip out part of his clothes. The young man looked intently in front of him and decided to use the blue Siku skill. But that wasn't all. He activated the Ku divine healing skill and disaster began to descend. The angel fell from a height with all his might and hit very hard, and his health level was negligible. He frowned, clenched his teeth, drops of sweat on his face. He wanted to say something, but he couldn't. Our hero took advantage of a new skill. It was a Ku of the healing arts. After a few seconds, a message appeared in front of Lin that he had killed the projection of the two-winged angel Kuro. The one-time Deathground dungeon had been completed, and the reward calculation had begun, and he had received an additional diamond chest. The guy reached the top ranking. He read that the secret realm would soon disappear, and the accumulated power would materialize into an exclusive reward. A system message appeared stating that he had received an exclusive weapon of unknown quality, the shimmering moon shadow blade. The young man took it in his hands and began to examine it carefully, for he realized that it was unique. A notification with weapon characteristics appeared, as well as information that absorbing similar weapons improves quality, enhances blade characteristics. Also, Lin read that the weapon has a redemption form. Each strike gives redemption energy, and the destruction form turns the blade into a weapon that deals damage. But that wasn't all, as the moon shadow form dealt physical damage and restored health in proportion to the damage dealt, and the blade also possessed the death of the sea moon characteristic. The silent destruction feature allowed you to create a powerful strike that would deal a huge blow to all enemies. It also had a characteristic such as the moon shadow rift. A notification appeared that the blade could heal or kill, and Knight thought about the fact that 3 forms and 3 ults was a near-perfect combination with his innate ults. He opened the diamond chest and got 20 free points, an ice bow, a diamond skill, a platinum equipment, and thought he was lucky. Our hero made the decision that he would invest all of his points in intelligence, and also said that his characteristics, based on the message data, were now roughly at the level of a level 20 professional. The young man reflected on the fact that this was only his first goal and climbed up. He stopped near the portal, and thought that while the Goddess of Luck's gaze buff was active, he should clear a couple of level 10 dungeons. The kid's voice came from the bushes, saying through gritted teeth that he was waiting for Knight. The one turned his head in bewilderment at the sound, and asked his opponent who he was. The kid started waving his weapon and shouted like a madman that today was Lin's death hour. Madman shouted that it was our hero who ruined his reputation, and added that everyone wanted him dead. All because he took his guide, and added that everyone turned their backs on him. The guy grabbed his weapon and asked if the kid was done, while he thought about the fact that he had warned the students not to waste time because of anger, and the students promised not to get involved. Lin originally wanted to teach a lesson, and himself hit the opponent and said that selling manuals was illegal, and slander was also illegal. The kid dropped to the ground, frowning, clenched his teeth, his whole body shaking with fine trembling and anger. But just a second later, he was already on his feet. He threw himself at the guy, his eyes going crazy and saliva flying in different directions. Our hero opened his eyes and mouth wide, and then reported that it was a demonic aura. He looked at the kid and thought about whether Cao Yuan was really in front of him. The kid opened his eyes wide, frowned, clenched his teeth, and drops of sweat appeared on his face. And the demon whispered to Cao about telling him that he was no equal to Knight and everyone despised him. The demon whispered to the young man that no one in this world cared about him. He also emphasized that no one wants to take care of him, and added that Yuan is just a bunch of dog shit that makes geniuses even brighter. And if he doesn't embrace his role, he'll be hated even more. Cao got angry and screamed that he would kill Knight, and the demon whispered that it was fine, and he would gain power beyond the heavens and change his whole life. The kid fell to his knees and began to beg Megao-san to grant him the power of the abyss. Then Yuan got to his feet, looked up, and announced that he no longer wanted to be human. Lin pointed his fingers at him and noted that the kid was spoiled by the abyss, and added that he had been infected by an abyss demon. Yan rushed to our hero and noticed that the power of the abyss was so strong that his body had become so powerful. Knight said that the guy had a chance to stop, and if he continued, there would be nothing left but to kill him. There is an article in the Code of the Professional Alliance that states what to do when encountering a spoiled one. Chow started laughing and asked Lin if he could really kill him, started swinging and shouting that it was his retribution. And he made a horizontal sword strike, a version of the abyss. Our hero fell to the ground. But still the enemy was able to wound him. A notification appeared that he was subject to the invasion of the forces of the abyss, and all of his stats were reduced, damage was increased, and he was affected by a permanent bleeding effect. Our hero got to his feet. He was really pissed off and literally thought for a few seconds. A weapon appeared in his hands, and the kid told Yuan not to blame him, and used a flash of moon shadow, retrieving the blade, while he himself thought about the fact that the kid was not his opponent, even though he chose the power of the abyss. His opponent looked very mad. He darted his eyes and clenched his teeth, and Knight thought about how he was just a level 10 boss. Cao shouted that it was just as he thought. Lin was just a priest who put everything into power and added that he was already a corpse, and then started laughing merrily. The young man thought about the fact that in such a case, there was no need to use the heaven and earth coup at once. He realized that there were abyss demons nearby, and if they noticed that he had a skill like invulnerability and decided to report it to the others, it would be to his disadvantage. Yen looked at his weapon and questioned how this was possible. Even with all the daffs, he had no idea how Knight was able to deal so much damage to him with just one blow. Our hero looked at the opponent and thought that the kid had no theoretical knowledge or observation skills. Cao didn't notice the magic damage, and he should hurry up to lure out the demons. The fat man began to run away, blood streaming from his wounds, and he was swearing. The young man clenched his weapon harder and thought about what he should do to keep Yuan alive, whether to trap the demons. The demon realized that using such a pawn would most likely not work, and a swordsman with improved artifacts would not be able to defeat the priest. He was using Cao in his dark deeds, and thought about catching Knight anyway. The demon remembered Huang Xiaofeng, who had fixated on Lin's invincibility and decided to act through him. The monster needed our hero to agree to work for him, and there would be a cool addition to his master's army. Cao's eyes burned like a madman's. He smirked caustically, and the demon thought about how he liked the second option best. And Yuan didn't stop. He laughed like crazy and tried to attack our hero. The villain shouted to Knight about whether he was surprised, and added that the real test was beginning. But our hero was absolutely calm. He stared intently at the kid and regained his health. This disliked Cao very much. He was so angry that he clenched his teeth and his face turned purple. Lin looked intently in front of him and asked Yuan. After all, he wasn't real, but an abyss demon. The kid yelled that the Alliance professionals were on their way here, and he didn't have time to waste on him, so the guy needed to hurry up and die. But the young man slung his weapon behind his back, put his other hand in his pocket, and looked at his opponent with a smile. The abyss demon through Cao told him that he could choose the best option to join them. Our hero looked at his opponent closely and smiled, and thought to himself that he had been caught, and then asked if he was proposing to join them, and asked what benefits the demon of the abyss could offer. And Yuan began to ask if one sentence was still not enough for the guy, and raised his hands up and then asked if the guy could see the power of the abyss, and the guy remarked that it was very powerful and it was interesting. Lin asked if Huang Xiaofeng's opponent knew Huang Xiaofeng, for he had refused his comrade's invitation, and even gave them a good telling off. Cao replied that he had personally invited him, but the brat didn't understand what he was being offered and dared to insult the power of the abyss. Our hero clarified whether the kid had given the fool a chance, but it was all for naught in the end. And indeed then, when the demon of the abyss came to Huan, he sent him out the door. Yuan grabbed his head and said that it was ridiculous and asked if Xiaofan didn't know his limits. The young man thought about the fact that it was very likely that Huan wasn't hiding or lying about anything, and this demon's intelligence was most likely on the same level as his own. Knight said that if the guy got the power of the abyss, he'd still give himself away and become a target for the Alliance hunters, and added that they'd better give it to him, and added that he had already gained the trust of the Alliance and could quickly rise to the leadership, secretly plunge humanity into chaos and destroy the damn world. Yan asked why the young man wants to destroy the whole world. Isn't he a popular personality? And Lin replied that Lulis are all hypocrites, and added that his parents died because they were weak and no one protected them, ignored them, and his mom and dad distracted the monster so they could survive but were brutally killed. Knight said professionals exploit the weak. There is no justice among people, only greed and selfishness, and added that everyone deserves to die. The opponent stared intently at the guy. Tears came to his eyes and he began to agree with our hero's words. He began to inflate like a balloon and screamed that he could feel the young man's pain. A monster came out of Yuan and started telling the guy to come and join the Abyss family, and he would give him the supreme power of the Abyss. The monster smiled and said that it was better to destroy this garbage world together. The young man spread his hands apart and waited for the Abyss demon to give him the power he held in his hands. And he began to call for the blade of moonlight very quietly, so that the demon would not hear. He then smiled and began to talk about the destruction mode being activated. The guy wanted to use his skills and clutched his weapon harder in his hands. The monster opened his eyes wide. His pupils narrowed greatly and became like dots, and he asked Lin if he was playing with him. Acting honestly, the guy began to attack his opponent. A notification alerted him that his damage was increasing by 50%. But he wasn't going to stop and use the skill Reverse Starlight, Fall into Hell. The demon's health level was rapidly decreasing, and it began to scream and fall down. Our hero realized that a damage boost had been received and began to summon the skill Reverse Surge of the Blue Sea, the Sea of the Dead. The Abyss demon's health was at its minimum. It was in a burning state, and its attack power was greatly reduced. Therefore, the young man had no intention of stopping. He continued to attack. The monster yelled that this was insane and asked what was wrong with this man, why he was doing so much damage. The guy applied the skill Reverse Divine Healing Art, Calamity, and the Abyss demon was subjected to the bleeding debuff. He thought about the fact that it was no wonder Yuan couldn't defeat Lin, even with the power of the Abyss. He realized that no one could defeat him, and mentally begged for help. Knight asked the monster if it was running away, and added that it had revealed its true form, and couldn't rely on its shadow copy. The Abyss demon screamed. He was surprised that the guy knew of his abilities from the beginning and had set a trap, sacrificing himself to capture his true form. Our hero's eyes burned with fire, and he calmly spoke of the fact that this was indeed the case. The monster used the Abyss hand skill and shouted that Lin was a traitorous person and he would fight him as hard as he could. He looked at the guy with hatred and yelled that he had already exhausted his blitz. Indeed, the young man's level of health began to decline rapidly. And then the Abyss demon used the new skill Abyss Claw, and Riley remarked that he would watch the young man dodge it. The monster got very excited, laughed merrily, and noticed that the guy had fallen into a trap. But Knight replied that it was the end, but only for the Abyss demon. His health level began to increase while the monsters rapidly decreased. Our hero used the reverse healing skill, but calmly glared at the enemy, and that one rapidly began to fall down and his health level was already at 0. After a while, a system message appeared, notifying that the Abyss demon had been killed. Lin received a blade of moonlight, which begins to absorb the remaining soul of the Abyss demon. The guy picked it up and thought about the fact that in real battles, experience doesn't accrue. But now he knows how weapons grow and improve in quality by killing the demons of the Abyss. The young man wondered if they could only improve with the souls of Abyss demons, or if they could absorb the souls of any creatures. The guy yelled what just happened. The girl replied that she didn't know. She couldn't see anything clearly. They called for professionals as someone was lying on the ground. Someone said that the city's pro-patrol service had already been notified, and they would be here soon. And Knight thought about what the Alliance should be told. That the growth weapon had absorbed the soul of an Abyss demon. He heard the patrolman yell at him to take off his gear and drop his weapon on the ground, and the guy was just getting ready to leave. The man shouted for him not to move, put his hands behind his head, or else they have the right to attack him immediately. Our hero let the weapon out of his hands and said he would do their bidding. He was completely calm. The young man used a skill, a mild paralyzing influence, and the patrolman apologized, discharged his weapon, and remarked that the guy would feel no pain, and it was standard procedure. Handcuffs appeared on Lin's hands, and he thought about the fact that the professionals in front of him were responsible for maintaining security in the city, and it was not worth creating a conflict with them. Other patrol officers were checking for signs of battle at the scene, providing medical care, requesting information, and reassuring residents. The young man looked around and realized that the people who had arrived were doing their jobs. One of the men ran up to the man in charge and reported that he would find a badly injured human student. He was unconscious, but had traces of Abyss power, and was probably a corrupted Abyss demon. The team leader couldn't understand anything as the corpse of the Abyss demon was found. The man noticed a level 20 Abyss demon covered in sword wounds, obviously killed by the long sword professional they had just apprehended. Patrolmen were watching camera footage, and someone asked why only a skeleton was left. The young men frowned, droplets of sweat appearing on their faces, and they couldn't believe it was possible. A system message appeared above Knight with his name, level, and personality description. The patrolman couldn't believe he was the one who killed the Abyss demon. But someone did recognize him and remarked that he was brilliant. A young man came over, said hello to Lin, and noticed that he was Wang Ma Chao, the captain of the first Abyss Demon Extermination Squad under the Professional Alliance. He immediately asked the guy if he had killed the Abyss Demon, and clarified if that half-dead student had been influenced by that monster, becoming corrupted, and then the young man subdued it. Our hero replied that it was him, and noticed that Yuan had turned corrupt before his eyes and tried to kill him. That's why he took action. Wang asked how he captured the demon since they hide their form. Knight remarked that he thought the demon was watching his victim from afar, and when he saw his failure, possessed him and pretended to offer power. That's when he manifested his true form to give him power as well. The young people opened their mouths wide in amazement and asked if this was all possible. Ma Chao thought about the fact that it was not easy to deceive such a cunning abyss demon. But after all, this was a student who was about to take a professional test. The man said Knight had single-handedly handled both the corrupted demon and its true form, and then offered our hero to cooperate and walk with them in the Alliance. One of the patrolmen noticed that it wasn't just a student in front of them and asked the captain if he hadn't heard about his reputation, then added that this guy was very famous. Wang frowned and said he didn't go online, but given the seriousness of the situation, they should follow standard procedure, and turned to the guy, with words that he understood them, and added that it might affect his upcoming plans for a professional test, but he couldn't make any exceptions. Our hero looked intently in front of him, and thought about the effect of the goddess of luck's gaze, disappearing. He sighed heavily, and reflected on the fact that his advantage in the professional test was still huge. The output had exceeded the target even before reaching the mark, and the young man told the captain that he understood and fully supported his work to fight the demons of the abyss. The man in the white tunic told Wang Ma Chao that there was no need to bring Lin Knight back to the department to investigate or keep him under surveillance. It was the captain's boss, and added that they would handle the guy after the test. The man covered himself in drops of sweat and remarked that it was all part of standard procedure and they couldn't break it, and added that if he let the young man go, he would be punished right at headquarters. The boss pointed out that no one would bother Wang. After all, it wasn't just his decision. It was a directive from the president and all the other department heads, including the famous curse master, and added that the young man had managed it alone without injury and qualified for the forgotten nest. Our hero scratched his head, but before he thought that the rumors on the internet were exaggerated. But the captain looked at the young man, and he was concerned about whether he really has unprecedented divine skill or talent. Knight asked his boss if he would be questioned. The boss said no, and informed him that the guy needed to focus on preparing for his cases. Also, the man in the white tunic remarked that if the guy needed anything, he could feel free to call the professionals for help. Wang, with his arms in his hands, began to apologize and said that he still had one question for Lin. The young man took the sword, and the capital asked if this matter had anything to do with the previous incident that Huang Xiaofeng had reported. Our hero said that this demon Megao, the same one that failed to bite Huang, after his plan failed, he turned to Chao Yuan, and he himself thought of Wang as a professional as he connected the two events. The boss noticed that Xiaofeng's constitution after testing is confirmed as 1 in a million, the genius of the corrupt abyss demon. Knight noticed that he easily managed to fool the demon while Huan remained untouched. The man in the white tunic said that our hero was able to deal with the monster, catch the corrupt and collect valuable information, and he does it better than lazy, highly professional fighters. The boss allowed Lin to go, but he informed him that he wanted to talk about something, but not publicly, and asked him to clear the area. The man in the white tunic ordered the area cleared, and Wang Ma Chao said to take the team away and give the weapons to Knight. The captain advised that the first active squad pack up and leave the area, and then he asked our hero for forgiveness for his recklessness. The young man replied that it was all right. The guy activated confidential mode. The boss noticed the area was cleared. Our hero revealed an exclusive growing weapon. Noticed he got it when he cleared the land of death, the hidden light of the flashing moon. But after he killed the demon, the weapon absorbed its power. The man was very much surprised. He opened his eyes and mouth wide and couldn't believe it. And Knight said there is little information about the growing weapons. Even the best libraries don't have detailed descriptions. And added that he wanted to ask if a growing weapon could increase its level after killing an abyss demon in the real world. The man noted that finding such a weapon is comparable to finding a needle in a haystack, and 3 such weapons have been found since the Union. But this is classified information, and he doesn't know all the details. And then added that he could tell one thing. From what he knew, growing weapons could gain experience by defeating monsters in dungeons and raising their level that way. But no weapons gained the power of demons. Our hero looked intently in front of him, and wondered if he was the first. The boss replied that it was true, and thanked the young man for confiding in him and sharing important information with the Union. Knight revealed that he thought that although the blinking moonlight was the first weapon that earned experience after killing dungeon demons, but there were likely other such weapons, and added that he was not the only one, and there might be more such weapons in the future, but they could be retaliation for the demons of the abyss, and it would be an advantage for humanity. The boss replied that it was good news, but it was best not to announce it to the public yet. An innocent person is in trouble because of their wealth. Such a rare, precious jade can start envy and jealousy. If the entire younger generation had the same viewpoint as Knight, the alliance would be much more stable and stronger. The man said that he would report the matter and the union would take it seriously, but it was better for Lin Ye to focus on preparing for the professional trial right now, and added that after the test, the union will contact the young man. Knight replied that he understood everything, and our hero went on his way. In a few minutes, he met the captain. The man saluted the lad and said he looked forward to joining the alliance and becoming one of them, and asked to be called Old Man Wang. And the young man agreed and went on his way. The boss asked Yankee what he thought about it. Our hero's file was on the table. The one replied that Knight not only had extraordinary strength, but he was also a calm person who thought big and planned ahead. Shang Guanyang was the same kind of person. Tianqi smiled and added that he was thinking about the fact that it was Yang who was the leader of this generation. The man in the white tailcoat sipped from his glass and remarked that it was hard to say all this because young people have their own ways, and then added that the fact that Lin could get a growing weapon that targets monsters in the dungeon was very surprising. At this time, a black foulness was spreading under the table where the alliance members were sitting. Knight entered the room and said loudly that he was back, but no one answered him. Mumu heard that the guy was already home and even saw him, but she didn't go to greet him, but hid behind the couch. The young man started looking around and scratching his head with his hand. He didn't say anything. Then he looked intently in front of him and said he could see Mumu sitting behind the couch. Su told Lin that he could at least pretend to be Nupagan, and he asked if the girl didn't say she would work hard, but she was resting and eating snacks at home. Mumu immediately became serious and showed the guy a system message that indicated she was level 10. Our hero opened his mouth wide with surprise. He couldn't believe the girl had it so quickly. Su wondered how it was to the guy, if it was surprising, and added that they could play together. The young man replied that it depended on her data, because she had been working hard lately and most likely hadn't slept nights. The girl replied that it didn't, and Lin said Mumu stayed up all night and worked for him. He glared at her, and Su squeezed one eye shut and asked our hero if he hadn't realized yet, and replied that it was all biometric tears, and then informed that the new skill was only required to clear the dungeon alone, and she could directly receive rewards from the treasure chest from the secret realm dungeon. She tried them for a bit. The young man was surprised and asked if she meant to say that biometric tears had no time or distance limit and allowed them to clear the dungeons alone, unsupervised. Mumu answered in the affirmative, and then added that he was now in the nightmare of the Loch Ness Monster, and added that judging from the system's hint, the final boss of the secret realm was badly injured, so it should be over soon. Knight said that's how her talent helps her level up, playing anytime and still being able to monitor her progress in real time. Su replied that she can help everyone and asked if the young man was jealous of her. He cheerfully replied that he would also like such a versatile assistant, and then asked if there was a limit to the fatigue of the skill, and also clarified if he could brush secret worlds without restriction. Mumu said that she wouldn't have been able to reach the 10th level otherwise and asked why Lin was so stupid today. The guy replied that he was just surprised that she had such a useful talent, and added that in that case, he needed to change his strategy for allocating points from 10 to 20. The girl looked intently at the young man and asked what he had just said and clarified what other point allocation system was in place. The young man replied that she has such a system in place and needs to adjust the best method of allocating points based on her talent, skills, and the equipment she has now. Su smiled, agreed, and said she would send it to our hero right away. The guy looked carefully at the cell phone screen and noticed that she should also include height, weight, and volumes. Mumu got very excited and asked what Lin Ye was all this for. He replied that it was to better assess her skill stage, and then added that her scores would directly affect the properties of the biometric tiers, from which she would have more advantages. The guy said that in low-level battles, it didn't matter if you won against a small monster, but in high-level battles, small details decided everything. Even a small difference in attributes could change the outcome. Su said she knew all that, but what did her measurements have to do with it? And then asked that he forget the whole thing and wait a minute. Knight also asked if Bai wanted to change jobs, and asked Mumu if she could provide the data as he was uncomfortable asking such a thing, and added, if she doesn't want to give them, that's a personal matter for each person. The girl frowned and asked the young man if he wanted to know other people's data. The guy held his head up, drops of sweat appearing on his face, and noted that he just wanted to help his co-commanders gain an advantage. She sat with meters in her hands and wondered if this wasn't just a piece of data, if there was anything more important than getting stronger. Sue remembered her childhood and thought about the fact that they had been together since childhood, and Lin had seen everything long ago. The girl blushed and thought about the fact that she was a little pissed off about whether or not she had to give exact measurements. She started taking measurements of her breast circumference and looked at the numbers and thought about how it was still 80B, and she had been drinking so much milk and nothing had grown. Mumu clenched her teeth and wondered if Knight would use this to make fun of her. She grabbed herself with her hands on her head and said that when she had her checkup, she was lined up to 80 degrees Celsius, and if the young man finds out about everything, how will she be able to keep her face in the future? And Sue made the decision to use data that wasn't hers, because it's the same as hers, and no one will know anything. And the girl thought her pink assistant was done with the dungeons and called out to her. That one showed up very quickly, and Mumu started taking measurements, while asking that she let herself be measured. The young man looked in front of him at the closed doors. There was, and wondered what Sue was doing there for so long. After 10 minutes, the girl announced that she had finished the test and added that he could look at it, but he shouldn't show it to others. The guy looked at the sheet carefully and asked if it was definitely her data, and added that there was some problem here. He clarified if the ADC data is accurate, and noted that it very much looks like it is not. Sue blushed and replied that she had such data during her last physical examination. Lin calmly said, if the data was wrong, their strategy would be useless. The girl snatched the sheet from the young man, frowned and began to correct the data and said that this time everything was correct. Knight smiled and replied that was more like it, and gave Mumu a flick on the forehead. She yelled. He looked at Sue intently and asked if she had asked G for the data. The girl squinted one eye and calmly replied that Bai refused to provide them, and noticed that the one replied that she couldn't bother the big boss, he shouldn't fuss over a problem like her, and also reported that G said that Lin had already given her so much good equipment and resources, and she had earned some money and points. Then Mumu laughed and pointed out that the silly girl wasn't afraid to show her data, but because she thought attribute points were useless. But she still gave her medical research data. Knight held his head and said that if it wasn't for Bai, he would have thought she was trying to lure someone else, and then added that from what he knows about her, the girl really doesn't want to bother others and is afraid they'll think she doesn't trust them. The guy took Sue's phone and began to transmit data to himself, and remarked that they should help Bai since she was very talented. Mumu wanted to say something to the young man about G's talent, but he turned his head to the side and was very much surprised. Pink assistant Mumu said that the system sent a notification that her mistress had gotten the new skill soul summoning bell, which could summon spirits for battle. Knight was very much surprised and asked if that one could also summon. He clarified they don't all play Matryoshka doll. Sue wagged her finger and replied that it was not the same thing, but completely different. She stated that the ability to summon spirits can only be used in secret dungeons. Unlike Mumu, it cannot be summoned in reality, and if a spirit dies, Sue can be revived. The girl spread her hands apart and said she didn't know about the rest, as she hadn't tried it yet. The guy replied that he understood her now. He snapped his fingers and remarked that the celestial system was unnecessary, and suggested we go to the dungeon to check the effects. After a while, the young men were near a secret dungeon called the Lizardman Tribe. A system message appeared in front of them with its description and complexity. Mumu asked Lin in surprise, wondering if he had changed his weapon into knife form. The young man looked at the girl and replied that he could let her try it. Sue didn't refuse such an offer, and her pink assistant stood back and admired. Mumu's health level skyrocketed, and she asked her copy if she had seen that trick. She closed her eyes and reported that there was nothing surprising about it, and remarked that she had something else interesting to show, and added that the bionic tear was using the exclusive soul-summoning bell skill, and she had a bell in her hands. A notification appeared that alerted that an unknown spirit had heard the sounds of the bell, and made contact with the world, and would soon descend into the dungeon. Our hero stared intently before him, and opened his eyes and mouth wide with surprise. It became very noisy. This is how the spirit began to approach them. Dust flew in different directions. A system message appeared, revealing that the spirit of the giant guardian tree had already descended. A huge monster appeared in front of the young men, shining its evil eyes. From the notification, one could know the spirit's level, skills, as well as its description. Lin thought about the fact that although the monster was of gold quality, it was obviously a top-level boss with characteristics beyond the gold level. He thought about it. If Mumu leveled up later, she would be able to summon bosses even stronger, of the appropriate level. The guy realized that the spirit summoning bell was similar to the item for summoning a curse master. Knight realized that the girl's talent allowed her to summon Big Brother from the start without any restrictions on recharge time. He looked at Sue and realized that this could be considered a half-divine level talent. The young man put his hand to his face and shouted for the girl to hurry up and check the spirit. She turned her head, smiled, and replied that she would follow the young man's instructions. And Mumu shouted to the guardian tree to go ahead and eliminate those lizards. Not far away from the monster were several small but very agile monsters. They were jumping and crying. The spirit began to regard them. Greenish smoke dissipated from his eye sockets, and he called his opponents ants. Those were indeed small, but the guardian tree didn't think long and began to attack them with a heaven strike. There was a very violent explosion, and a blaze appeared, which illuminated the whole area. The spirit used his skill, dealing heavy damage to his opponents and creating a shockwave that deals a second blow after the first one. The giant tree giant looked in front of him and told the opponents to rest in peace. Our hero squinted his eyes and thought about the fact that Heaven's strike reminded him of that Goblin King's skill. He realized that this giant's attack range was much wider and the damage was much higher. The guy asked Mumu if he could try to fight against him, and she was very surprised by the question. Ta replied that the giant is now his co-commander, and he can't just sit back and relax as there is another boss ahead, and this is a good opportunity to see the tree guardian fight alone. But the young man smiled and stated that it was just about bionic tears. Sue covered her pink assistant, who opened her eyes wide and declared that she was refusing. Knight opened his eyes wide and wondered if she couldn't be revived, and then said that it didn't matter, and let the guardian tree be around until the next zone. The head of the lizardmen would rather believe in the Wood Bro's skills, and added that he would handle the rest himself. And our hero pushed himself off the ground, jumped so high that he jumped over the tree guardian, who was surprised. The guy attacking the lizard very hard, his health level was rapidly decreasing. Lin thought about the fact that there was no critical strike, and he couldn't kill his opponent with one basic strike. The young man couldn't think of anything better but drew his weapon. In a few seconds he had killed the lizardman guardian. Sue opened her eyes wide and told Knight that the damage from his base strike was so high. The young man thought about how it looked like the spectral lunar hue had gotten a lot of bonuses, and because he used to strike at long range, changed the numbers on the healing skills. The guy was well aware that the advantage of the spectral moonshade was that the higher the attack speed, the greater the bonus. He concluded that this only applied to normal monsters, as the angelic ghost completely ignored physical damage and needed to rely on reverse healing skills to quickly defeat enemies. Lin clenched his weapon harder in his hands, and a notification appeared in front of him that a moment of silent destruction had occurred. The lizardmen's health level was rapidly decreasing, and they tried to dodge the attack. And a few seconds later, a system message appeared that the group of lizardmen had been destroyed. Mumu watched everything carefully, and thought about the fact that Lin had gotten even stronger, and she couldn't keep up with him. The bionic tears offered the guardian tree to destroy enemies together, and it agreed. Knight gripped the weapon harder in her hands, and noticed that it was her time to show herself as well. Then he thought it was time to see the power of the moon's shadow between the crevices and the oath of the ocean and the moon. The young men walked forward, and suddenly saw a message that they had arrived at a tribe of lizardmen, and 300 warriors would fight them to the death to protect their tribe and leader. Sue said that 300 10th level lizardmen guards would do enough damage, and Lin remarked that he would deal with the treatment and keep the guardian tree alive. The bionic tears told the giant to run towards the walls and destroy them. A system message appeared stating that the guardian tree bike had entered recharge mode and could accelerate afterward, and he began to attack his opponents who came at him in great numbers. The mummies with bionic tears were also not standing on the sidelines, but fighting the lizardmen. Our hero used the moon shadow formula and thought that invulnerability to any damage for 3 seconds, increased movement speed, and the ability to move hundreds of meters in an instant were very important. A notification appeared that the guy had summoned an illusionary moon jellyfish. He was informed that all debuffs would be removed from him and his target. From the next message, it was revealed that the skill made him and his target regenerate health every half second for 15 seconds. A few seconds later, the main boss of the lizardmen appeared at the edge of the forest. He was extremely angry. Bionic Tears asked the Great Guardian Tree to fight at full strength and show what it could do, and he immediately used a desperate strike. The monsters scattered in different directions and began to scream. Knight looked at everything that was happening, and thought about the fact that the Bionic Tear was intelligent and didn't need any further instructions from Mumu, and the Great Guardian Tree obeyed only her. The guy realized that the giant was very strong, but his disadvantages were also very obvious. He had a lot of melee skills, and in the future he had a lot of advantages against classes with high agility. Our hero thought about the fact that he had seen enough and tested most of the skills that the spectral moonshade possessed. So the young man decided to apply the skills of reverse star power and reverse hell. Just a few seconds later, a system message appeared stating that the young man had defeated the boss of the Lizardman dungeon. The young man with a serious expression began to look around, but did not show his joy. The guardian tree said it could feel it and he was so familiar with this power, but he couldn't figure out what it was. Our hero stood staring intently at the giant, and only snickered after saying that. The guardian tree then said that before it returned to the soul realm, it would like to ask Lin for a favor. The guy asked what kind of favor, and thought to himself that this creature had consciousness. This surprised him. He frowned and thought about the fact that it was no wonder they said the giant tree couldn't be revived, and it was a one-time summoning. The young man remembered a knight who is wise and has his own memories, but he is a mere phantom. He is a summoner among his kind, and if killed, he can be resurrected several times. Knight asked the giant what he wanted to ask of him. He realized it was an intelligent being from another world. And the giant tree said he hoped very much that the young man could take his mistress to the Forgotten Lair. The giant remarked that he hoped very much that the young man had a special mark that would give him access to that place, and added that his mistress also had access to it, and he could take her with him. Lin looked intently in front of him, and wondered who the giant tree was talking about, and who he was. His opponent was silent for a moment, and then said he was talking about bionic tears, and then added that he was just a simple guard with no name. Knight ordered the giant tree, which was bowed on one knee, to stand up to begin with. Suddenly there was a system message that the Lizardman tribe quest was completed, and a silver chest would be obtained, and whether or not to click on the button to open it. Our hero told the giant that he must first answer the notice before he could answer him. He started pushing something and told Mumu that they needed to get out of here first, and she agreed. Sue stared intently at the young man and thought about what had happened. And Lin thought that according to universal knowledge, the awakened adventurer's talents were always effective for the awakened adventurers. In a symbiotic relationship, no matter how strong the awakened talent is, it will be extinguished in this world. And even if there are biological traits, the summoned beings will protect their host. But bionic tears can summon beings from other worlds, allowing them to be their own masters of themselves, and he even has a pass to enter a forgotten lair. Knight wondered what kind of creature she was. He was worried that Su Mumu and even all of humanity might be in danger. He realized that they couldn't let the hidden threats to humanity go unpunished, and it had to be dealt with immediately. Lin told the girl that he had one thing to do, and she could return first, or do other tasks. She agreed. The young man turned his head to the side and examined the bionic tears. Mumu saw all this, opened her eyes and mouth wide, and then asked if something was wrong. The guy looked at his cell phone screen and replied that he was fine. But he needed some time and wanted to warn her about it beforehand. He stepped back to the window, put the phone to his ear, and asked his opponent if he was free right now or not. After a while, he was at Huang Quan's place. The man asked what had happened so urgently that he needed to talk to him in person. Our hero said he was a high-ranking employee, and must know he had enough qualifications to make it into the Forgotten Lair. Huan smiled and replied if the guy wanted to ask why no one had informed them about this dungeon. The young man remarked that this was one of the questions, and clarified if the man was worried that it would affect his thinking, and wanted our hero to take a professional test at the beginning. Quan sighed heavily, and said that it was one of the reasons, but noted that he could tell him. The man was silent for a while and informed that Lin might not know how complicated that dungeon was, and added that it was a dozen times more difficult than the secret world dungeon Knight had encountered before. The levels of even the smallest monsters starting at Diamond, many participants unable to escape, and eventually dying. Huan noticed that geniuses who have been granted the right of entry are still afraid to use it, and our hero noticed that it's because the equipment and skills are above Diamond level. The man replied that it was indeed true, because only legendary level equipment could defeat the boss, and if someone went through it alone, they would receive mythic level equipment and skills. The young man thought about how everyone was worried about him getting cocky. He thought about it. If he was like Huang Feng, thinking that his talent and strength were invincible, and madly rushed over there, he would die immediately. The guy rested his beard in his hands, and asked what level he needed to enter that dungeon. Quan replied that the 15th and that was the minimum requirement, but he advised waiting until the 20th, synchronizing all equipment and skills before planning to go there. Knight smiled and told him to be sure. He wasn't that reckless since the dungeon was so important. He would prepare himself properly and treat it like a professional test. The man remarked that there was another reason he wanted to talk about it, and said that most of the Alliance's forces had recently been focused on tracking down the demons of the Abyss, and added that they had gotten cocky, and Knight had almost gotten caught by them. Huan added that a fallen white jester had recently appeared, and they had also learned that the demons of the Abyss had infiltrated the Alliance with many spies. Quan said that they would definitely do something about Jiang Cheng, and the adventurers should not let the tragedies of the past happen again. The man advised that there may be some changes in future events, and for Lin to follow up on their further notifications. Knight didn't understand anything, and his opponent talked about how the Alliance had announced that they might lock down the entire city just in case, and there would be a purge of internal personnel. They were looking for those with a penchant for corruption. Juan stated that a professional test is coming up and they can't let these rats influence the candidates. That's why they don't publish the news, so as not to cause panic. And added for the young man not to worry about the demons of the abyss, but to focus on his studies, and pointed out that they were in control of the situation. Even if someone infiltrated the staff, they would handle it. The young man sipped from his glass and said he had another question. The guy thought about the fact that if the awakened talent of a professional belonged to the summoning type, and the summoned beings came from another world, was there a chance of betrayal? Suddenly the man said calmly that no, there was no such chance, and there was a pause in the room. Our hero looked at his opponent and opened his eyes wide. He was very much surprised. And Juan said the young man knows that awakened talent is symbiotic with professionalism. And notice that this power develops inside everyone. It is like the most important brain, living and dying with them. It is the most reliable ally. The man reported no matter what he calls for or what world he is from, it would not be life-threatening to a professional. Juan emphasized to our hero that the creature still unconditionally obeyed its master. Juan revealed that they had tested this in battle. Even high-level control abilities that could influence the thoughts of others could not make the summoned attack the summoner. The boy thought for a moment and asked what would happen if an abyss demon was summoned. The man replied that it wouldn't happen, and said that there were such talents in the Alliance. The demons of the abyss summoned by him not only would not call people to join the abyss, but would join the forces of the abyss and become informants. The man fixed his glasses and asked if Knight had awakened such talent or someone else. The young man replied that it was his girlfriend and co-commander. Lin frowned and spoke of how the girl's talent had summoned a creature from another world, and it sensed that it had permission to enter the forgotten nest, and asked to go there together. Juan rose from his seat and wondered with surprise if the creature also had permission to enter. The boy hesitated and replied that the spirit spoke of something that was there, but he wasn't quite sure about it. The man looked out the window and remarked that he would not betray his friend, and thus him, and said that the young man could have him, but it had to be reported to the Alliance. Juan reported that his friend, a promising big shot, and if the Alliance confirmed that the creature was summoned by an awakened talent, they would not restrict its actions in human-populated cities. He smiled and added to assure Knight that the Alliance would not investigate his girlfriend, but rather such people were valued and their development supported. Our hero clenched his hand into a fist and thought about being calm, while he thought about how he didn't like being tense and realizing he wasn't in control. The man looked at the young man and asked if he had asked everything he wanted to ask, and said he wanted Lin Ye to ask a question as well. Took a folder from his desk and said that he had an autopsy report on the abyss demon, and according to the conclusion, the true cause of death could be a prepared magical attack, and added that the abyss demon looked like it had been burned to death. But its cells and organs were actually exhausted and atrophied, and its functioning was gone all at once. Huang noted that it was similar to the effects of the old paraquat and clarified that maybe it was Knight's awakened talent, the poisoned milk technique. The guy picked up the paperwork and thought about the fact that the medical examiner was a professional, had fully analyzed the effects of the reversal treatment, and answered the man's guess. Quan laughed merrily and said that they had even argued about it for a long time, and added that they wondered if Lin had injured the abyss demon. Some experts believed that the other pro had already injured him several times. Let the guy take the advantage of the situation, the man added. Then they argued about whether the deed would be credited to him. This surprised the young man, and Juan was surprised that the man didn't know about the rewards for the demons of the abyss. He revealed that the Alliance rewards every professional who killed an abyss demon, and told the lad to wait for the award ceremony and get the award he wanted, and added that the young man could specify the items he wanted. Our hero thought a little and asked if he would send him information as to what items were needed. The man answered in the affirmative. Lin stood up and said he would go back to his place as he had to take his comrades to the dungeon. Swan moved closer to the young man and wished him good luck on his professional test. Then he clenched his fist and added that the boy would take first place and bring glory to the whole city. Knight replied that he would do his best, and then asked if the man had bet on him, and the man only laughed. That same day after lunch, Lin saw Bao and started calling out for the girl as he knew she was looking for him. She looked at the guy and said that she had already made her decision. She had a folder in her hands, and Cao noted that it had all her data and information in it. The guy was thinking about how he hadn't expected the girl to trust him so much, and he couldn't let down her sincerity. He needed to think things over carefully. He put a hand on Bao's shoulder and told her not to worry, and remarked that her talent would increase to level 2, and he would take her to the next paired dungeon. The young man looked at the girl and informed her that they would consider whether or not she should change classes based on what they had read. Chao was very excited, her eyes shining with joy, and she replied that she would prepare well. The girl started to run and yelled out, continued her farming as her fatigue level wasn't at maximum yet. Lin was very surprised, rubbed his forehead with his hand, and said that he wouldn't knock her fighting spirit for now. The young man thought about taking the data from the past dungeon, adding the information from this time, and making calculations. He sat in front of the computer and thought about the fact that the data on current skills and equipment was fully collected, but also the amplitude, muscle movements in the dungeon, reaction time, and habitual actions were very important. The guy realized that Baiji's current data wasn't quite accurate yet, as the three of them had gone through the dungeon last time. Lin noticed that at the moment Bai didn't stand out for anything besides a successful buff, but he decided to prepare a plan so that even without revealing her talent, the girl could pass the final test and be accepted. He realized that the class change challenge, it was a solo dungeon and luck alone wasn't enough for him. Smoking Fallen was in the dungeon. He reported that Lord Magao had been slain. Black Fist Fallen replied that he knew about it and offered to finish off whoever killed him. There was another dude standing off to the side and also asked if they would finish off Magao's killer. It was Cardboard Fallen, who noticed that there were pro-Alliance spies everywhere right now, and it was worth it to reveal the power of the Abyss. He would be immediately surrounded by a mop-up squad. He approached the girl, her name was Lissa, and added that the bald man was clumsy and unwieldy, and he got angry at these words. The girl noted that she was most concerned with who the Lord would appoint as commander, and asked if she needed to do that assassination mission that had been talked about earlier. The man with glasses, who was sitting a little further away, replied that no one had cancelled the assignment. Black Fist frowned and remarked that they didn't need to act themselves, but all they needed was a little intervention, and there was no point in stopping because of Lord Magao's death. Smoker laughed and noted that they just need to add one perfect ingredient to the final challenge dungeon, the Inhuo incident, which when activated instantly raises the difficulty level to catastrophic and summons a boss. Baldy asked why the Lord was using such a valuable artifact and asked what would happen if they all attacked together. Would they fail? He was immediately called an idiot and informed that no one in the Alliance would just let him through to the target of the assassination. The young man stared at Black Fist and said that he was so eager to ruin himself. Lissa asked the guy not to get mad and asked the card player to understand this egghead. She frowned, squinted one eye, and added that the bald man had always been a little slow on the uptake and just liked to act out, and asked why he was always teasing him. The card player replied that he couldn't tolerate fools, especially if he had to work with them. And Lord Magao had dragged the bald man into their team, and it was going to backfire sooner or later. And the bald man suddenly rose from his seat to the surprise of all present, bowed and asked for forgiveness. Smoker told him not to apologize and pointed out that he was stronger than card player and could do much more. As the green mist suddenly began to rise up, the fox looked at it in surprise, even opening her mouth in surprise. The young men immediately rose from their seats, and all began to greet the gentleman together. Thoth said that Matao was dead, and he would appoint a new demon of the Abyss to command them, as well as one fallen one for support. And noticing that they had already heard the name of the fallen man, he was quiet for a bit, and said it was the White Jester, a smoker who was kneeling down and said they had certainly heard the name, and added that White Jester not only destroyed more than a dozen high-level professionals, but also massacred a club where there were ordinary people, more than 1,000 killed. These were his achievements. The gentleman was very much surprised, and then inquired if they were not glad to see him come. Smoker replied that he recognized White Jester's power, and remarked that what he was doing was endangering their lives, and added that he would refuse any operations if he arrived in Jiangcheng. The gentleman laughed and remarked that it was very good that they had an opinion, and added that his precious children had every right to refuse him, and said that White Jester had no power to command them, and would not participate in their operations, and he would arrive in the city to take over their previous assignment, to kill Shangguan Yant. And he also added that the Abyss Demon would also have their backs on their new assignment. The Lord said to bring Huang Xiaofeng to the dungeon, as he was an outstanding fallen, and would be their trusted ally, and then remarked that after doing these things, one should deal with Lin who killed Magao, and added that the young men should remember not to reveal their identity and presence. The master told the young men to do everything in a pattern, to use Inzuo's adventuring in the final test, and added that the boss reinforced in rage will kill him, so no one will know anything, and let the professionals regret bitterly. Smoker informed the Lord that he knew Lin had killed Lord Magao and asked if he was really worth spending an artifact that could permanently bring diamond-level gear for his sake. Black Fist laughed and remarked, "When they all get their diamond gear, the Lord will be able to kill anyone. The Lord listened as the guy with glasses said that even if Knight was able to kill Lord Magao, after all, he was only level 12, and then added that that guy's threat level was probably no higher than Shang Guanyan's. The spirit reported that the pathetic alliance of professionals was hiding everything, but he still got the information he needed and noticed that Lin had gained admission to the Forgotten Nest, and his life was more important to the top brass than the head of the sect. He smiled wryly and noted that everyone who was secretly guarding Shang Guanyan had now switched to protecting Knight and remarked, if they all attacked that guy, it was unlikely that they would even be able to injure him. Some of the boys replied that they understood, and the Lord ordered them to complete the task and he would take them to the Abyss where they would be purified, and continued that after that, they would become true Abyss warriors. But if they failed, they were not yet worthy of receiving the profound power of the Abyss. The young men knelt before the master and said with one voice that they would not fail and would definitely carry out the order. The man announced that Lin's disciple had defeated the Abyss demon, and the Alliance was giving him a certificate of merit. One of the young men said that this guy was a terror, beat up Huang, made his father apologize, and also killed the Abyss demon himself. Some kid remarked that Knight's characterizations were now the best in the whole school. Someone said the kid would be the first on the final trial, and Mumu sat back and smiled. Suddenly, the girl's expression changed as she listened to the various gossip voiced by the students. She suddenly realized that Lin was facing danger, and hadn't told her anything. She hoped that the Alliance could protect the guy, and hold the forces of the Abyss firmly in place. The school principal presented our hero with a diploma, and told the boy that he was the pride of the school, and the hope of the Alliance. The young man thanked him, and remarked that he was not worthy of such words. For every professional is the hope of the Alliance to eradicate the forces of the Abyss. The old man pointed with his hand, and noticed that there were platinum-level equipment and skill books here, and Lin could take everything if he wanted. The students who were behind him were very surprised. The young man replied that there was no need to take everything as much wouldn't be useful, but thought that the moon shadow and the ancient dragon necklace were important and couldn't be replaced. He also realized that the set of 4 items could not be separated, and the platinum ring had no key property. The guy knew that the gear they were wearing lacked the active skill instantaneous movement, but it still didn't give him a boost. Lin mentally clenched his fists and understood that the characteristics of platinum items were so seductive. The young man scrutinized everything, calmed down a bit, and showed with his hand what he would take. It was the belt of inspiration, the boots of agility, and the holy radiance. The belt of enthusiasm, as was clear from the notice, had a unique effect, increasing the healing and shields received. Dexterity boots added percentages to agility, movement speed, and the resulting slowing effects were reduced by 25%. And the book Holy Radiance expends mana to heal one ally with a powerful flash of light, instantly restores a lot of health, and greatly enhances all stats. The guy smiled and thought about whether this wasn't the skill of a white sacred rider. He thought that if one reversed the effect of the skill, one could abruptly incarnate to rage mode and reduce all of the enemy's stats. Our hero reached out for the skill book to activate it in such a way. The young man thought that the dexterity boots coupled with the ancient dragon necklace were perfect against dexterous bosses and shut down his weakness in characteristics. The principal said that the award ceremony was over and everyone could go, but he did not forget to say that they had to study for the exam. And Ling Yu quietly said about how the Alliance had already allocated people to protect him, and today's speech was for everyone to pay attention to him and not give the Abyss forces a chance to attack him. The old man noticed that the final test for the class change was in 3 days, and asked what his plans were. Knight smiled and said he wanted to pump the gear up to level 10 and put his comrades through the test. The director asked who exactly on his team would be taking the test, looked at the bracelet that glowed and told the guy to go with him as there was something to discuss. Already in the office, the old man began to look at the documents and asked Lin if Su Mumu and Bai Ji were his teammates. He answered in the affirmative and added that he was not worried about Mumu, but he was very worried about Ji. Then continued that the girl's talent was hard to use, and she herself was thinking of changing classes. The principal smiled and remarked that if a guy picked her for the team, then she definitely had strengths, laughed and informed them that they couldn't give them any indulgences in the exam, and then added, if Bai passed it, there would be no problems with her future path, and she wouldn't have to worry about her studies. The older man summarized that Knight had nothing to worry about. He just needed to focus on getting the team ready. He agreed, and held out the paperwork. Our hero took them in his hands, took out a leaf. His pupils became like dots with astonishment. The director said that this is a real reward for them. He was quiet for a bit and added that it is also part of the professional alliance plan. After a while, Bai Ji was in the lizard dungeon. She had a 10th level. Lin shouted to her that the attack amplitude was normal, and to trust her assessment of the situation, and added that the reaction time could still be improved. The huge monster didn't think of stopping. It began to attack the girl. She dodged the attacks as best she could. They were very strong and intense. Night watched and yelled for her not to hesitate or dodge as she chose a very precise angle of attack. So Bai gathered her strength and started attacking the huge monster that kept coming at her. After a few seconds, a message appeared saying that the goddess of luck's gaze could be applied to a single target and gave a special buff. The girl smiled as she learned from the next notification that opening the final chest greatly increased the chance of dropping the rarest equipment or skills that suited her. Our hero looked at the girl and thought about the fact that this was a new skill Ji had gotten after upgrading her talent to level 2. He realized that this was very useful, as it reduced the number of attempts before a guaranteed drop, dramatically increased the chance of a platinum drop, and eliminated dropping the wrong class of items. The guy grabbed his head as it came to him that the girl had been hit with a personal passive effect that no one but her could use. The young man thought for a bit, and came to the conclusion that he was thus on equal footing with Bai in this regard. The girl approached the young man and informed him that she had made this equipment build and new stat distribution on his advice. Lin replied that she was making tremendous progress, and if she didn't hesitate, listen to commands, she could take it easy on the final test. Ji took herself by the brush of her hand, closed her eyes, blushed, and then laughed softly. Our hero thought about how everything was as expected. Everything was a bit through the roof. But at first he had thoughts that Bai had been chosen for the heavy sword class because of her innate strength. The guy approached the girl to ask if she was really ready to change classes. She blushed again, put her hands to her chest and informed me that she was actually fine, and added that she really liked the heavy sword and asked if she was doing something wrong. The young man pointed at her wounds and remarked that he knew she had accumulated many strength points and added to become a good swordsman. She had not only trained but tried everything she could. But her choice of class, her future, and then informed her that he would tell her straight up that her physique was not naturally suited for the swordsman class. And if she continued down that road, it could cause damage to her body and permanent damage. Knight said they may be there for her for a while, but eventually she won't be able to continue on the path of a professional. The pupils of Bai's eyes narrowed very hard, tears came out, and she wanted to say something but she couldn't. The guy said that changing class isn't easy either. The challenge will be in a single-player dungeon with a high difficulty level. He continued that only Bai would be able to go into it and pointed out that he had not been through it. So he could not give any strategy, and she could be seriously injured or broken. Lin smiled and remarked, if Ji passed him, the fights would open up a whole other side for her, and his advice, no matter how she decided, would still be part of their team. The girl put her head down and began to think about the captain and her comrades. She was well aware that her skills very often only worked on herself. But despite all this, Knight and Mumu always treat her more sincerely, and that flattered her greatly. Lin was quiet for a moment and said that they would deal with this matter first and then think about everything else. Bai clenched her fists and shouted that she had made up her mind and would take the class change trial. She put her hand on her head as she felt very dizzy. Ji whispered that she was going to throw up. The young men approached Mumu, and so told them that she had been waiting for them at this spot for half a day. She folded her arms across her chest and remarked that tomorrow was the final challenge and she, as a team member, couldn't even find her teammates. Knight handed her some kind of leaf and told Sue not to get mad as they had a surprise for her. He informed the girl to look at him carefully, then she would understand everything. The protesting arena was packed with a huge number of people. Students talked amongst themselves about being nervous. Some underestimated their abilities, and others talked about their connections. Ji looked around and noticed that there was a huge amount of people gathered. It surprised her a lot. Mumu moved closer to the girl and asked if she was ready or not. Bai answered in the affirmative. Sue and Knight suddenly heard someone call their names very loudly and turned their heads. There were young people standing there with a placard and shouting that they were confident that Lin and Mumu would succeed. The guy asked Sue if her aunt and uncle were still unaware. The girl smiled and remarked that she couldn't tell them everything. The young man hesitated and remarked that he thought they had other channels of information and added that it was a very highly classified secret. The town governor came onto the bridge and everyone rejoiced as he appeared unexpectedly. The man greeted the students and remarked that he had one piece of news to announce today, and informed them that the current test was postponed for 3 days. He was silent for a while and said there was one more important announcement, and it concerned the reason for postponing the trial. Students began to ask what had happened, some wondering if the wave of demons had gone again. Everyone got very tense, asked a huge number of questions and had different assumptions. And the city manager said that today is a famous day, because today is the day that the city has a special draft student, and announced that according to the Alliance's stipulation, each next special student would be required to complete a unique instance with their chosen team before the final challenge. And he added that this dungeon challenge will be in the format of a final proficiency test, with live streaming and recording, so that all students can watch and learn. The city manager said that Zhang Cheng's first special student becomes a student of the first Lin Professionals Academy. The man informed his opponent that Knight had suddenly been declared a special student, and instance, it was a dungeon that was originally meant to be a test. Smoker asked if he had embedded Yinghuo's arrival into it. The latter replied in the affirmative, and remarked that everything was too coincidental since they hadn't changed instances, and he found it suspicious. The kid with the glasses interrupted him and remarked that it didn't matter. They just needed to complete the Lord's task, and the rest was none of their business. The card player frowned, and Smoker said that his job was simply to confirm that Lin himself had entered the dungeon with the embedded artifact, and if there were no malfunctions inside, one should immediately return to base. The guy replied that he wouldn't fail, as he activated that mechanism silently, and the town manager didn't notice anything at all. Smoker pointed out to his opponent that the patrol professionals could smell his aura of abyss. He also told card player that the guards could also notice that the difficulty of the dungeon had changed, and blocked the entire hall, and then he would definitely be in trouble. But the kid calmly said he would leave as soon as he had to, as he was keeping a close eye on that side, and added that the target would be entering the dungeon soon, and asked how his companions were doing. Smoker frowned and stated that the dumbass Hequan had handled Huang Xiaofeng and they had the one. He thought for a bit, and added that they still hadn't contacted Bai Ji yet. The card player said that the most important thing for them is to eliminate Shangguanyan. They should not care whether he survives or not. The kid told the boss that he realized as soon as the news was announced that it was about Lina, because to become a special student, one had to make a huge contribution to the alliance or awaken a divine talent. Cartonchik noticed that Xiaofen didn't have such a status, and Shangguanyan didn't have one either. The town manager told Lin to just stand in front of him and asked if the principal had informed them everything in advance. The man reached forward and a purple smoke began to rise upward from his ring. The young men put their hands out in front of them, and after a while a portal appeared in front of them. A system message revealed that they would soon be entering an unknown dungeon of nightmarish levels. The team members heard that they had entered the dungeon and received the item bone of return. After a while, the young men were notified that the item was worth using to leave the dungeon immediately. Our hero frowned and saw the message that he was under attack, and the return bone was becoming inaccessible. The players were very scared, and the difficulty of the dungeon, under the influence of the tempter, was raised to disaster level, and the bone began to disappear. It meant that they could not leave the dungeon. Mumu turned to the young man asking if this was the one. Drops of sweat appeared on the guy's face. He was quiet for a bit and informed that the dungeon had mutated. These dungeons have mutated, new monsters and zones have appeared. The only task for the participants was that they need to survive.